There is a question that Tolkien himself planted in the story, buried it in the text like a seed under frost, waiting for the right reader to find it. It sits inside one of the most famous monologues in the entire mythology. The moment when Saruman, in his study at Orthanc, finally shows his hand to Gandalf. The moment when the mask comes off and the real Saruman stands revealed. And Saruman, in that speech, says something that almost everyone hears as a threat, as the villain announcing his ambition. But if you listen to it differently, if you hear it not as a boast, but as a confession, the speech becomes something else entirely. Saruman tells Gandalf, the ring does not stay hidden forever. The ring will be found. And when it is found, a new power will arise, and Saruman intends to be that power. He has been looking for the ring, not passively watching, not waiting for the ring to resurface, actively looking. For years, for decades. With all the resources of Isengard and all the cunning of the most learned mind in Middle-earth, Saruman the White has been hunting the One Ring. And here is the question that Tolkien planted. What if he found it? Not Sauron, not Frodo, not the Fellowship, not the flowing river of fate that Tolkien arranged so carefully. What if the one being in all of Middle-earth who combined the intellect to understand the ring, the power to survive wielding it, and the specific ambition to use it? What if that being found the ring first? What happens to Middle-earth? What happens to Gandalf, to the Shire, to Frodo? What happens to Sauron? And most importantly, what happens to Saruman? Because the answer is not what you think. The answer is not a simple story of victory. The answer is not Saruman as hero, not Middle-earth saved by the unexpected champion. The answer is something far darker, far more complicated, and far more true to who Saruman actually is. A portrait of what it looks like when the right person finds the wrong thing. Stay with me. This one gets complicated in all the best ways. Part 1. Who Saruman actually was. Before we can understand what Saruman would do with the ring, we have to understand what Saruman actually was. Not the Saruman of the movies, the sneering villain, the man in the tower, the white robes gone black. The real Saruman. The Saruman that Tolkien built across decades of mythological architecture. Saruman was Karuna in Sindarin, the man of craft, or more precisely, the man of skill. That name is not decorative. That name is the key to the entire character. Saruman was a Maya, one of the angelic powers, the class of being that includes both the wizards and, at the corrupted extreme of the same order, Sauron himself. Among the 5 wizards sent to Middle-earth, Saruman was the most powerful, the head of the order, the White, the one Gandalf and the others deferred to. And before the wizards, in the ages before Middle-earth, Saruman served all, the smith of the Valar, the maker, the craftsman, the divine being whose defining quality was the love of creation, the love of shaping matter, of understanding substance, of taking the raw material of reality and making it into something that had not existed before. All made the dwarves. All created an entire race out of the specific, overwhelming desire to make something that thought and spoke and built. The dwarves are Ul's masterwork, his unsanctioned, unauthorized, created out of sheer, creative, longing masterwork. And Saruman served Ul for ages before coming to Middle-earth, absorbing Ul's craft obsession into the deepest layers of his being. Saruman's fall is not the fall of a good being corrupted by external evil. Saruman's fall is the fall of a craftsman who applies his craft to the wrong materials. Saruman does not fall because Sauron seduced him, though Sauron's influence is real. Saruman falls because Saruman's defining quality, The love of making, the love of skill, the love of the perfect thing executed perfectly. That quality, turned inward, turned toward the acquisition of power rather than the creation of beauty, becomes the precise machinery of his own destruction. Now add to this, Saruman spent decades studying Sauron. Decades reading the ancient texts of the Rings of Power, understanding the theory behind them, understanding how they were made, understanding what the One Ring was at a level of technical comprehension that literally no other being in Middle-earth could match. Not even Gandalf. Not even Galadriel. Saruman understood the ring the way a master jeweler understands a diamond, not just as something beautiful and powerful, but as a structure, as a made thing. As a specific, technical, this is how it works object whose properties could be understood, analyzed, and potentially redirected. This is the being who was hunting the ring. Not a warlord, not a tyrant, a craftsman who had studied the most dangerous artifact in the world and believed with the specific blinding confidence of the very intelligent that he understood it well enough to use it. Part 2. The Hunt and the Gap. Let me tell you precisely where the split point is, where the story breaks away from what we know and becomes something new. The canon timeline goes like this. Smaugl finds the ring in the year 2463 of the Third Age. Smaugl retreats to the Misty Mountains. The ring lives under the mountains for nearly 500 years. Bilbo finds it in 2941. Bilbo keeps it for 60 years. Frodo inherits it. Gandalf spends 17 years investigating before finally confirming the truth in 3018. The ring Bilbo found is the One Ring. But here is the gap that opens the what-if. Between 2851 and 2953, roughly a century, Saruman actively misled the White Council about the ring's location. Saruman told the council that the ring had been washed out to sea, lost in the Great Sea, beyond recovery. This was a lie. A deliberate, calculated lie, told specifically to prevent the council from searching the Gladden Fields area, the region where Isildur died, and where Saruman himself was quietly, privately, systematically looking. Saruman knew the ring had not gone to sea. Saruman had done the research. Saruman had traced the histories, studied the currents, worked out the mathematics of possibility, and concluded that the ring was almost certainly still in the Gladden Fields region or had travelled down the Anduin. And Saruman kept this conclusion to himself. So the question is not could Saruman have found the ring? The question is, how close did he come? Our split point is this. In the year 2944, 3 years after Bilbo found the ring and 3 years into Bilbo's possession of it, Saruman's agents, following a lead that Saruman himself had calculated based on the ring's drift patterns in the Anduin, search a particular stretch of the river's eastern bank. In the canon timeline, this search finds nothing of significance. The agents are a few years too late, operating on slightly wrong calculations, and the trail goes cold. In our timeline, the calculation is slightly more accurate. The agents find, in the mud of an old river bend, a cache of ancient Memrian artifacts, including, half-breed in river silt, caught against a root that has held it for nearly 1,500 years, a plain gold band. The ring comes to Isengard. Part 2b. What the ring was doing all along. Here is a thought that Tolkien's mythology supports but rarely makes explicit. The ring was not passive during the 1,500 years it spent in the Anduin's mud. The ring is not sentient in the way that a person is sentient. It does not dream or reason or plan in the conscious sense. But it has Sauron's will pressed into it, and Sauron's will, even in this limited, artifact-shaped expression, has the specific quality of always working toward return. The ring does not sleep in the mud and wait. The ring is, at some level below thought, always finding the angle. For 1,500 years in the river, the ring found angles. The ring that Gollum found did not find Gollum by accident. The ring reached, in the specific way it could reach from the bottom of a river, and found the beings whose desire it could leverage. Found Daegol first. Found the specific quality of he will pick it up in Daegol's hands, reaching into the water for the fish he thought he'd caught. And then Smaugol, whose desire the ring could feel as clearly as a craftsman feels the grain of wood. But there were other possibilities before Gollum. The ring was in the Gladden Fields mud for 15 centuries, and in those 15 centuries it reached for others and found nothing sufficient. Warriors who crossed the river and did not look down. Travellers who camped on the bank and did not wade in. The ring tested them all, and found in most of them either the wrong kind of desire or the right kind of resistance, and rejected them as potential bearers. What the ring found in Saruman's agents was different. Not the agents themselves. They were ordinary Dunlending soldiers, unremarkable, carrying ordinary desires. But behind the agents, at the end of the chain of instruction that sent them to that specific river bend, behind them was Saruman. And Saruman's desire, carried through the specific quality of his instructions, his chosen search location, his intellectual investment in the ring's recovery, Saruman's desire was enormous. Specific, fully legible to the ring's reaching. The ring did not simply allow itself to be found. The ring chose the moment. Chose the specific reach of mud and root that would put it in contact with Saruman's agents rather than some other searcher. The ring, for 1,500 years, had been waiting for the right desire to come close enough. Saruman was the right desire. This is the thing that the story is circling from the beginning, and that becomes fully clear only at the end. Saruman did not find the ring. The ring found Saruman. The ring let Saruman's agents succeed where all previous searchers failed, because the ring assessed Saruman as the optimal next bearer. The bearer who would, through the specific operation of his intelligence and his pride and his ring-shaped vulnerabilities, best serve the ring's purpose of returning to Sauron. The most capable person in Middle-earth spent decades hunting the most dangerous object in the world. The most dangerous object in the world spent 1,500 years hunting the right host. When they found each other, only one of them was being fooled. Part 3. The moment of contact. Here is what we need to understand about the moment when Saruman touches the ring, because this moment determines everything that follows. When Sauron puts on the ring, Sauron is completed. The ring and Sauron are one substance. The ring is literally a portion of Sauron's own soul poured into gold. When Sauron wears the ring, he is more himself, more powerful, more coherent. When Isildur took the ring began its corruption immediately, began whispering, began seducing, began applying the specific, subtle, ring-shaped pressure that is the ring's defining quality. Isildur was a great man, a king, a hero, and the ring took approximately 2 years to maneuver him into the position where he would die for it. When Bilbo found the ring chose a strategy of gentleness, of slow, quiet, it's just a trinket reassurance. Bilbo was a hobbit, small, simple, lacking ambition, lacking the specific quality of I want to rule that the ring could leverage. The ring played Bilbo long 60 years of mild dependency, not the aggressive seduction it used on greater beings. When Saruman picks up the ring, when his fingers close around it in the lamplight of some Isengard antechamber, when the weight of it settles into his palm, the ring meets, for the first time in its existence outside of Sauron's direct possession, a being who knows what it is. Saruman knows. Saruman has read every surviving text about the Rings of Power. Saruman has studied Celebrimbor's craft, has analysed Sauron's techniques, has developed a theoretical understanding of the One Ring that is, in its purely intellectual dimension, almost complete. Saruman picks up the ring and within 30 seconds, he knows. This creates a situation the ring has never encountered. Every previous wielder has been, to varying degrees, surprised by the ring, has not understood what they were holding, has not had the theoretical framework to recognize the ring's specific quality of it is watching you back. Saruman is not surprised. What happens when you try to seduce someone who knows exactly what you're doing? The ring is a made thing. It is not, at this level of analysis, sentient in the way that a person is sentient. The ring has Sauron's will impressed into it, has the specific desire of a being who wanted above all else to dominate. The ring applies that desire like a craftsman applies a template. It looks for the specific shape of the bearer's desire, the particular quality of want that the bearer carries, and it amplifies that want. It does not create desire. It finds what is already there and makes it enormous. And Saruman's desire? Saruman's desire, the specific thing that the ring finds in the deepest architecture of his being. Saruman wants to understand. Saruman wants to know how things work. Saruman wants to master the craft of reality itself. And the ring, perceiving this, whispers, yes. And now you can. This is the moment. Not a corruption in the dramatic sense, not a seduction with visible drama, just the ring in Saruman's hand, the ring finding the specific shape of Saruman's ambition, and Saruman, brilliant, proud, already compromised by decades of self-deception, saying yes. Part 4. The first decision. Saruman now faces a choice that will define everything that follows. And the choice is not the obvious one. The obvious choice, the choice that a simple villain would make, is to put on the ring immediately, to claim it, to announce himself as the new power, to challenge Sauron directly and seize the dominion of Middle-earth. Saruman does not make this choice. This is the first thing that distinguishes our scenario from a simple power fantasy, and it is the first thing that reveals how well Tolkien's characterization holds even when we bend the plot. Saruman is not a simple villain. Saruman is an intelligent villain. And an intelligent person who picks up the most dangerous object in the world does not immediately strap it on. Saruman's first decision is to study the ring, to place it in a secure chamber in the depths of Orthanc, to examine it, to understand it fully before attempting to use it. This is entirely consistent with who Saruman is. This is the craftsman's instinct, the all-trained ring theory expert instinct that says, you do not use a tool you do not understand. And the ring, Saruman believes, is the ultimate tool, the ultimate made thing. And he will master it before he deploys it. The decision to study rather than use immediately is simultaneously the smartest thing Saruman could do and the thing that dooms him. Because the ring does not sit quietly while being studied. The ring is not a passive object. The ring is not a jewel in a case. The ring has Sauron's will impressed into every atom of its structure, has the desire of a being who mastered the corruption of lesser spirits for thousands of years. The ring has been doing this, the patient, slow. You don't even notice it work of gradual corruption, since before Saruman was born. So Saruman studies the ring. And the ring studies Saruman. And in this mutual examination, the ring is learning something that will give it immense leverage in the months ahead. Saruman is afraid. Beneath the confidence, beneath the intellectual pride, beneath the craftsman's certainty, Saruman is deeply, fundamentally afraid of Sauron. Has been afraid of Sauron for centuries. The relationship between Saruman and Sauron is not simply the relationship of enemy and enemy. It is the relationship of student and terrible teacher, of a being who served Oul, whose master craftsman Sauron once was before the fall, who understands at an intimate technical level how much more powerful Sauron is than Saruman will ever be. The ring finds this fear, files it away, begins to work with it. Part 5. What Sauron feels. Let us step out of Isengard for a moment and into Dol Guldur, or wherever Sauron's diminished presence is gathering itself in the mid-Third Age. Because something happens to Sauron the moment the ring is picked up by a bearer of any significant power. Sauron feels it. The ring is Sauron's own soul, a fraction of his power and his will poured into gold. When the ring is dormant, lying in river mud, held by a creature as inconsiderable as Gollum, the connection is faint. Muffled, like trying to hear a voice through several stone walls. When Bilbo finds the ring, the connection brightens slightly. Bilbo is slightly more significant than Gollum, has slightly more of the specific quality that the ring can resonate with. But Bilbo is still a hobbit, still small, still below the threshold of beings who have the ring-relevant quality of wanting to rule. When Saruman picks up the ring, the connection flares. Sauron does not know, in the first moment, who has the ring. Sauron does not receive a message with a name and address. What Sauron receives is a signal, a sudden, vivid, this is it, quality of ring awareness that tells him the ring has been found by someone significant, someone with real power, someone whose contact with the ring has produced the specific, high-amplitude resonance that only comes from a bearer who matters. Sauron begins hunting, mobilizes his intelligence apparatus, sends the Nazgul, still operating in the shadows in this era, to search for the source of the signal. And here is the thing that Saruman does not know, and that the ring knows perfectly well. Sauron is going to find him. Not immediately, not tomorrow, but the clock is running. The moment Saruman picked up the ring, he started a countdown. And the countdown ends when Sauron's servants find Isengard. Saruman has, if he is lucky, if Sauron's search is slow, perhaps 2 or 3 years before the Nazgul come knocking. Part 6. Saruman's plan. What does a man do when he has the most dangerous object in the world and 2 or 3 years before its original owner comes to take it back? Saruman plans. This is what Saruman does. This is what Saruman has always done. The White Council meetings, the long debates, the careful political maneuvers, Saruman is, at his core, a planner. A strategist, a being who looks at a situation and immediately begins calculating the angles, the leverage points, the sequence of moves required to convert a disadvantage into an advantage. Saruman's plan has 3 phases, and the plan is, this is important, genuinely brilliant. Saruman has been thinking about this scenario for decades, has run the theoretical version of this plan in his mind countless times, has prepared, in a very real sense, for exactly this moment. Phase 1. Strengthen Isengard. The ring's power, even before it is worn, even while it sits in its chamber under study, provides something useful to a being of Saruman's capability. A sharpening of his own natural abilities, a clarity of thought, a sense of enhanced perception. Saruman can feel the ring's presence the way a craftsman can feel a perfect tool in his hand, not wielded yet, but there, available, ready. And the proximity to the ring, the simple nearness of it, begins accelerating Saruman's plans for Isengard. The mechanisms he had been gradually building for years are suddenly clearer, more achievable, their timelines compressed. Phase 2. Neutralize the White Council. The other wizards and elvish lords who might challenge Saruman's possession of the ring must be either recruited or neutralized. Gandalf is the most dangerous of these. Radagast is irrelevant. The blue wizards are gone. That leaves Elrond and Galadriel as the elvish powers who would resist Saruman's claim if they discovered it. Saruman has to move carefully, has to continue presenting the White Council with the face of its respected head while preparing to make the council irrelevant. Phase 3. When the ring is sufficiently mastered, when Saruman's study is complete and he is ready to wield it, confront Sauron directly. Not with an army, not with a war. With the ring itself, with the specific power that the ring gives its wielder over all other ring-bearers. Saruman's plan is to use the One Ring to dominate Sauron's servants, particularly the Nazgul, and to use that domination as leverage to gradually strip Sauron of his power base until Sauron, weakened and isolated, can be directly challenged and defeated. It is a good plan. It is, in theory, the correct plan, the plan that a sufficiently powerful and skilled wielder of the ring could execute. The plan that Galadriel refused to enact because Galadriel understood something about herself that Saruman has not yet understood about himself. That wielding the ring does not simply amplify your power, it amplifies your nature. And Saruman's nature, already compromised, already cracking in specific ways that Saruman cannot see because no one can see their own corruption, Saruman's nature is the problem. Part 7. Gandalf becomes suspicious. 3 months pass. Saruman is moving faster than he has moved in years, issuing orders, receiving reports, sending agents. The Isengard project, which had been proceeding at the measured pace of a long-term strategic initiative, suddenly has urgency. New forges are commissioned. New walls are planned. Saruman receives emissaries from various factions with an efficiency and incisiveness that his previous meetings had not displayed. Gandalf notices. Gandalf has known Saruman for more than 2,000 years. Has served under him in the White Council for centuries. Gandalf knows the texture of Saruman's presence, the specific quality of Saruman's manner, the way Saruman holds himself, the particular flavor of Saruman's intelligence in conversation. And something has changed. Gandalf cannot identify what has changed. The change is subtle, is more in the quality of Saruman's attention than in any specific behavior. Saruman is more focused, more purposeful, less tolerant of the council's usual deliberative pace. There is a new quality to Saruman, a sharpness that Gandalf has not seen before, or rather a sharpness that Gandalf remembers from very early, from the first centuries after the wizards arrived in Middle-earth, when Saruman was still genuinely excited about the mission rather than merely managing it. Gandalf begins asking questions. Not directly. Gandalf is not that artless. Gandalf asks sideways. Asks Radagast if anything odd has come out of the Anduin region. Asks Círdan if any unusual agents have been seen in the coastal regions. Begins, quietly and methodically, retracing Saruman's intelligence network's recent movements. What Gandalf is looking for, he is not sure. He has a feeling, the specific, uncomfortable, something is wrong feeling that Gandalf's millennia of experience have taught him to trust absolutely. Something has changed in Saruman. Something significant. And Gandalf, being Gandalf, is going to find out what. This creates the first crisis point in our scenario. Saruman, watching Gandalf with the enhanced perception that ring proximity provides, notices that Gandalf is looking. And Saruman must decide, bring Gandalf in or push Gandalf away. The ring whispers, push him away, isolate. The ring's instinct, Sauron's instinct, pressed into the ring's structure, is always toward isolation of the bearer, toward cutting the bearer off from potential sources of support or challenge. The ring has been working on Saruman's relationship with the White Council since the day it arrived at Isengard. Saruman, partially influenced by the ring and partially operating on his own pride. His genuine pre-ring conviction that he can do this alone, that the others would only complicate matters, Saruman calls a White Council meeting. Calls it at Orthanc. And at this meeting, Saruman does something extraordinary. He lies more elaborately than he has ever lied before. Part 8. The Great Deception. The White Council meets at Orthanc. The year is roughly 2945. Bilbo has had the ring in the Shire for about 2 years, though no one on the council knows this. And in our timeline, Bilbo never found the ring at all. Galadriel is there, and she is watching Saruman with the specific quality of elvish perception that sees beneath surfaces. Elrond is present, with 3,000 years of experience reading the faces and voices of beings who are not telling the truth. Gandalf is there, suspicious but as yet without evidence. Saruman stands before them and delivers a performance that would have made any actor weep with envy. He tells the council that his agents have made a discovery. Not the ring. Saruman says nothing about the ring. He says his agents have found evidence of Sauron's renewed interest in the Gladdenfields region. Evidence that Sauron believes the ring may have survived after all, may have been carried further downriver than previously assumed. Saruman urges the council to take this threat seriously, urges increased vigilance, urges the kind of broad-based monitoring of the Anduin corridor that will, conveniently, give Saruman's own agents plausible cover for their continued presence in the area. He is creating noise, generating a cloud of plausible activity that will mask his own real operations. And the brilliance of the deception is that everything he says is technically true. Sauron is interested in the Gladden Fields. Sauron does believe the ring may have survived. The Anduin corridor does need monitoring. Saruman is making true statements in an arrangement that conceals the central lie, that Saruman already has the ring, and the ring is sitting 3 floors below the meeting room in a locked chamber in the foundations of Orthanc. Galadriel looks at Saruman throughout the meeting with the expression of someone who is listening not to the words but to the space between the words. At one point, her eyes meet Saruman's, and for a fraction of a second, for the span of a single breath, something passes between them. Something that is not spoken and is not quite communicated, and that Galadriel will spend the next several months thinking about. She does not speak at this meeting. She says almost nothing. But after the meeting, riding back toward Lothlorien, she says to Celeborn, "Something is wrong with Saruman." Celeborn, who is careful and precise, and not inclined toward imprecise alarm, asks her what she means. She cannot explain it. But the feeling does not leave her. Gandalf rides to visit Saruman privately, 3 weeks after the council meeting. Rides to Orthanc, and sits with Saruman over several hours of conversation that begins as collegial and ends as something slightly less comfortable. Gandalf asks about the ring searches, about the specific geographical areas Saruman's agents are covering, about the theoretical question of what they would do if the ring were found. Saruman answers every question, answers it smoothly, intelligently, with the specific quality of a man who is prepared for exactly these questions, whose answers are so well crafted that the very smoothness of them is almost suspicious. Gandalf leaves Orthanc with the same feeling he arrived with: something is wrong. But no evidence for it, no specific thing he can point to. This is how Saruman buys himself time. Not by hiding, by overwhelming with truth-adjacent information. by being so forthcoming, so detailed, so exhaustively responsive to questions that no specific gap is visible. The lie is buried under so much true material that finding it requires knowing exactly where to look. Gandalf knows, in his bones, that he should look harder. But at this stage, there is nothing specific to act on. And Gandalf, who respects Saruman despite his misgivings, who has not yet arrived at the certainty that Saruman is a direct enemy rather than a complicated ally, Gandalf continues his work elsewhere, the Shire. The scattered warnings about shadows in the east, his endless footsore tobacco-sweetened wandering through the small and large concerns of Middle-earth. And Saruman, watching him go, feels for the first time since finding the ring, genuinely afraid. Not of Gandalf, exactly, but of what Gandalf represents, the possibility that someone might look in the right place at the right time and see what is there. The ring notes the fear, intensifies it slightly, redirects it toward action. Saruman returns to his study. Part 9. The ring begins its work. 6 months after the ring arrives at Isengard, Saruman puts it on for the first time. He does not intend to. That is the first thing to understand. Saruman has been diligently studying the ring without wearing it, examining it at arm's length, testing its edges with his perceptions, building his understanding incrementally the way a scholar builds an argument. He has been disciplined about this in a way that his admirers would recognize as characteristic and his enemies would recognize as doomed. The wearing happens in a moment of intellectual impatience. He is working on a specific theoretical problem, trying to understand the mechanism by which the ring would allow him to communicate with and command Sauron's servants, and the answer is just beyond his grasp. Just there. Just visible. If he could only see it clearly enough. And the ring is in his hand, because he has been handling it during the examination, and without fully deciding to, in the way that you sometimes find yourself reaching for the thing before the conscious decision has been made, he puts it on. The experience is unlike anything Saruman has ever felt. He has power, has always had power, the specific magnitude of Maya-level spiritual force that places him above nearly every being in Middle-earth. He knows what his power feels like from the inside, a pressure, a clarity, a sense of the world as a collection of forces he can perceive and manipulate. The ring amplifies this by an order of magnitude that he had not, despite all his theoretical understanding, genuinely prepared for. It is like the difference between knowing that fire burns and putting your hand in flame. The theory was correct. The experience is something else. For 10 seconds, Saruman stands in his study in Orthanc with the ring on his finger and understands things he has never understood before. The structure of the rings of power laid out before him like an architect's drawing. The mechanism of dominion, how the ring reaches through the other rings to their bearers, how the command is structured, how the will propagates through the system. Sauron's intelligence, not Sauron himself, not Sauron's full terrible awareness, but the shape of Sauron's thinking, the architectural patterns of how Sauron's will was organized when he made the ring, all of this suddenly legible. And then he takes the ring off. This is the moment that reveals how much Saruman has genuinely prepared. Because the first wearing of the ring, for most bearers, establishes a dependency almost immediately. The withdrawal from those 10 seconds of ring enhanced perception is, according to the mythology's internal logic, intensely uncomfortable. The world suddenly seems duller, slower, less responsive. The bearer reaches for the ring again within minutes. Saruman does not. He puts the ring back in its case. Sits down. Writes in his journal for 4 hours, transcribing everything he experienced, every observation, every theoretical insight. Working, treating the ring as a tool, a research instrument, not as a comfort. But something has shifted. Saruman knows it, writes it down in the journal with the specific honesty that great minds sometimes achieve about themselves, the honesty that comes before the denial sets in. I understand now why they couldn't put it down. He writes this. And then he writes, "But I am not them." This is the last sentence in Saruman's journal for 6 weeks, because 6 weeks later, the Nazgul reach Isengard. Part 10. The Nazgul come. They do not come as an army. They do not ride visibly down the road to the gates of Orthanc with banners and declarations. This is not that kind of confrontation. 2 of the 9 come. Invisible, not clothed in black robes, not riding black horses, but present in the way that the Nazgul can be present when they choose not to be seen. Moving through the borders of Isengard like cold air moving through a warm room. Testing, probing, following the signal that Sauron received when Saruman first handled the ring. They do not enter Orthanc itself. The Tower of Orthanc is one of the most defensible structures in Middle-earth, built by the Inmemorians with the specific, nearly magical quality of Inmemorian stone that resists intrusion. But the Nazgul do not need to enter. They are not here to steal the ring. They are here to confirm. Saruman feels them arrive. The ring enhanced perception that has been gradually, despite his resistance, becoming his default way of experiencing the world. That perception lights up at the Nazgul's presence the way a compass lights up near a magnet. He knows what they are immediately. Knows there are 2 of them. Knows they are sending information back to Sauron. He is terrified. This is the single most important emotional moment in our scenario, and it is the moment where the whole alternate history pivots on Saruman's psychology. Because Saruman has 2 choices, and the ring, which has been carefully, patiently, over 6 months repositioning Saruman's internal landscape, the ring makes certain that the most frightening option feels like the bravest. Option 1. Contact Gandalf. Contact the White Council. Reveal that he has the ring, that the ring has been at Isengard for months, that Sauron's servants have tracked its location. Accept the consequence of that revelation, the stripping of his leadership of the council, the loss of his carefully maintained position, the humiliation of being revealed as the liar he has been. But retain the collective power of all the free peoples of Middle-earth standing between him and the 9. Option 2. Face this alone. Demonstrate to the Nazgul and through them to Sauron that the ring's new bearer is not someone to be trifled with. Put the ring on and send a message that Sauron can feel through the ring's connection, not yours anymore. The ring wants option 2, desperately, because option 2 puts the ring on Saruman's finger and begins the real work of binding them together. And the ring knows, with a specific, patient, Sauron-level strategic intelligence impressed into its making, that once Saruman puts it on in direct confrontation with the Nazgul, taking it off again will be substantially harder. Saruman chooses option 2. He stands in the topmost chamber of Orthanc. He places the ring on his finger. He directs his will outward toward the 2 shadows testing his borders. And with the ring magnifying his power into something vast and cold and terrifying, he drives them away. Not immediately. Not easily. It takes 4 hours of sustained effort that leaves Saruman physically trembling and mentally exhausted in a way he has not experienced since before he became a wizard. But the Nazgul retreat, pull back from Isengard's borders, return to the shadows. Saruman stands in the empty chamber, ring on his finger, and feels something he has not felt in centuries, pure, uncomplicated triumph. He has defeated the servants of Sauron. He has proven, to himself, to the ring, to whatever part of Sauron's awareness was monitoring through the Nazgul, that he is not the lesser party here. That the One Ring in his hands is a real challenge to Sauron's dominion. He does not take the ring off for 12 hours. When he finally does, he stands at his window looking out over the machinery of Isengard, the fires, the wheels, the organized industry of the complex he has been building, and he thinks, I can do this. The ring, in its case on the table behind him, does not whisper or glow or make any theatrical indication of its satisfaction. It does not need to. The work is already done. Part 11. Sauron's response. What does Sauron make of this? Sauron has felt the confrontation through the ring's connection, has felt the Nazgul driven back, not destroyed. The Nazgul cannot be destroyed by mortal means, but repulsed, pushed away from the ring's location by a will powerful enough to do it. Sauron has felt the specific quality of this repulsion, has assessed the level of power that produced it, and has drawn conclusions. The conclusions are not the ones that a lesser villain would draw. A lesser villain, upon discovering that a rival has stolen their primary power source, would immediately go to war, would mobilize, would send the Nine to retrieve the ring by force, would act from the specific, ego-driven, this is mine response that drives most villainy. Sauron does not do this, because Sauron is, among other things, the most subtle strategic mind in the history of Middle-earth. And Sauron's strategic assessment is this: the bearer is powerful, the bearer has not yet mastered the ring, and direct confrontation is premature. What Sauron does is more frightening than attack. Sauron waits, watches, maintains the connection through the ring without trying to assert dominance over it, maintains it at the lowest possible level, just enough to receive information, not enough to tip off the bearer that the connection is there. Sauron is learning Saruman, learning his patterns, learning his strengths and his weaknesses, and the specific shape of his relationship with the ring. Sauron has done this before with lesser ring bearers, has spent years learning their vulnerabilities before acting to retrieve the ring. Sauron knows that time favors him here. The ring will do the work. Sauron has made the ring to do the work. He simply needs to be patient. But Sauron is also doing something more active, and this is the thing that will shape the next phase of the story. Sauron begins, quietly and through channels that Saruman's intelligence network does not cover, to feed information to the White Council. Not about the ring, not directly, but about Saruman. About Saruman's agents, about the specific intelligence operations that Saruman has been running in the Anduin region. Enough information planted in the right places to sharpen Gandalf's existing suspicion into something more pointed. Sauron wants Saruman isolated, surrounded by enemies, forced to rely entirely on the ring. The master craftsman working at the very highest level of his art. Part 12. Galadriel sees, 4 months after the Nazgul probe, roughly a year and a half after the ring arrived at Isengard, Galadriel looks into her mirror. The mirror of Galadriel is one of the mythology's most mysterious instruments, a basin of water that can show things that were, things that are, and things that yet may be, all subject to interpretation, and all liable to change based on the choices of those who view them. Galadriel uses the mirror rarely and with great care, because its revelations are not gifts, but challenges. What Galadriel sees in the mirror, Orthanc, burning, not the burning of enemy attack, the burning of something from within, the specific quality of a great fire that originates in the tower's own foundations. And in the heart of the fire, a white hand closed around a gold ring. And the hand is not Sauron's. Galadriel steps back from the mirror. She is the bearer of Nenya, one of the 3 elvish rings. Through Nenya, she has a sensitivity to ring-related events that other beings do not have. And what she has just seen, combined with the feeling she has carried for 18 months, the specific Saruman is wrong feeling that she cannot articulate, suddenly resolves into something she can name. Saruman has the ring. She does not know how. She does not know when. She knows with the specific, Elvish. I perceive this to be true quality of certainty that Saruman, the head of the White Council, has the One Ring in his possession. She sends a message to Gandalf. Not through normal channels, not through the usual messengers and intermediaries. Directly, through the communication methods available to beings of their power. The message is brief. Come to Lothlorien. There is something you must hear. Part 13. Gandalf and Galadriel. The meeting in Lothlorien is the most consequential conversation in the alternate history's first phase, and it is a conversation that both participants spend its entire duration wishing they were wrong. Galadriel tells Gandalf what she has seen in the mirror, tells him her conclusion, tells him that she believes Saruman has had the ring for at least a year, possibly longer. Gandalf is silent for a long time after she finishes, the specific weighted silence of a being processing something that rearranges everything. Then he says, "How certain are you?" Galadriel says, "Certain enough to tell you, not certain enough to act without confirmation." Gandalf spends 3 days in Lothlorien. 3 days during which he and Galadriel examine everything they know about Saruman's recent behavior, every conversation, every council meeting, every report from every agent. They are building a case. Not for an arrest, neither of them thinks in those terms. Building a case for confrontation. For the specific White Council, this requires a decision kind of confrontation that their institutional structure can accommodate. The shape of what they are seeing, laid out in sequence. Saruman's sudden acceleration of the Isengard project. His peculiarly energized performance in council meetings. His elaborate but strangely over-prepared answers to Gandalf's questions. The agents in the Anduin region, whose movements, retraced with fresh eyes, suggest that they were not simply monitoring, but retrieving. The specific timeline of when Saruman's behavior changed, and the fact that the change coincides precisely with the window when Saruman's theoretical calculations about the ring's drift would have been mature enough to direct an actual search. By the end of 3 days, Gandalf is as certain as Galadriel. And he is angry in the way that only someone deeply, genuinely betrayed can be angry. Not the hot anger of immediate insult, but the cold, settled, this changes everything anger of a relationship that has been revealed as a lie. He rides to Orthanc. Part 14. The confrontation. This is the scene. The scene that, in every version of this story, is the hinge point. The moment before which the alternate history is still potentially recoverable, and after which it absolutely is not. Gandalf arrives at Isengard alone. Rides in through the gates that are still open to him, still maintained by Saruman's orcs with the specific quality of this guest, is tolerated that Saruman has maintained even as his other preparations have hardened the complex into something that looks more and more like a fortress. He meets Saruman in the upper chambers of Orthanc. And this is not the canon confrontation, not Gandalf arriving after the War of the Ring has begun and Saruman declining to help and Saruman locking the gates. This is earlier. This is Gandalf arriving before the war, before Saruman has consolidated his position, before Saruman has burned his bridges beyond possible repair. Saruman knows why Gandalf has come. The ring has been telling him, not in words, because the ring does not use words, but in the specific, ring-shaped way of enhanced perception that Gandalf suspects. That Gandalf knows, or nearly knows, and is here to confirm. The meeting begins formally. Both of them are, at this stage, performing the role of colleagues, Saruman the host, Gandalf the visitor, the specific. Centuries-old quality of their relationship providing a scaffolding that neither of them immediately abandons. T. The view from the high windows. The measured, elegant small talk of beings who have done this many times. And then Gandalf says, "Where is the ring, Saruman?" Just like that. No preamble, no evidence laid out. The direct question fired straight across the room. Saruman goes very still. What Saruman does in the next 30 seconds determines everything. And what Saruman with the ring on a chain around his neck and the ring's whispered counsel in his ear, and the ring's patient 6-month work on his pride, and his fear shaping every impulse, what Saruman does is this. He tells the truth. Partially, he tells Gandalf that yes, he has the ring, that he found it through his research, that he has been studying it, that he has a plan, a real plan, a plan that he genuinely believes, to use the ring to defeat Sauron permanently. He lays out the strategy with the specific, brilliant coherence of a presentation he has rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. Phase 1. Phase 2. Phase 3. The Nazgul. The gradual stripping of Sauron's power base. The final confrontation from a position of strength. He makes the case. He makes it well. He makes it so well that for one terrible moment, Gandalf can see the logic of it, can see how someone of Saruman's intellect and preparation might actually believe this could work. And then Gandalf asks the question that destroys the whole edifice: when did you last take the ring off? The silence after this question is the longest in our alternate history. Saruman cannot answer it. Because Saruman, who has been wearing the ring almost continuously for the past 3 weeks, who started wearing it during the Nazgul confrontation and has found, despite all his determination and all his preparation, that taking it off requires a specific act of will that becomes harder each time, Saruman cannot answer the question honestly without destroying his own argument. Because if he cannot take the ring off, he cannot control the ring. And if he cannot control the ring, the plan is not a plan. The plan is a delusion. And Saruman is not using the ring. The ring is using Saruman. He does not answer. He says something else instead, something about the difference between dependency and mastery, something about the transitional period required to fully integrate with the ring's power, something that is technically words, but is not an answer. Gandalf knows. He can see it in Saruman's face, in the way Saruman's hand has gone to the chain around his neck, without Saruman appearing to notice. Gandalf knows, and Saruman knows that Gandalf knows. And in the space between these two knowings, the last possibility of honest collaboration closes. Part 15. The point of no return. This is the moment we have been building toward. The moment when the alternate history crystallizes into something that cannot be undone. Gandalf says, "Give me the ring, Saruman. Give it to me, and we will take it to the council, together, as we should have done from the beginning." And Saruman says no. Not dramatically, not with villainous speeches, just no. The simple, quiet, I have decided no of a being who has made a choice and will not unmake it. The ring is on his finger now, had moved there during the conversation, sliding from the chain to his hand in the unconscious, habitual way that the ring establishes possession over its bearers. Saruman stands in the high chamber with the ring on his finger and says no to Gandalf, and in saying no becomes the enemy. What follows is not a battle, not yet. Gandalf does not have the power to take the ring from Saruman by force, and Gandalf knows it. Even before the ring amplified Saruman's natural abilities, Saruman outclassed Gandalf in direct power. With the ring active, an attempt by Gandalf to take the ring would be catastrophic for Gandalf. But Gandalf has one weapon that the ring cannot fully counter: witness. Gandalf has seen. Gandalf knows. And Saruman, who cannot kill Gandalf without changing the entire calculus of the war he is planning, cannot prevent Gandalf from leaving and telling what he knows. He could trap him, could lock him in Orthanc the way he locks Gandalf in the canon timeline, on the pinnacle of the tower. But Saruman does not immediately do this, and the reason he does not is the ring's first major strategic miscalculation. The ring wants Gandalf isolated, wants him imprisoned. Whispers this. But the ring's whisper comes through Saruman's filter, through Saruman's own intelligence, which recognizes that imprisoning Gandalf will trigger exactly the White Council response that Saruman is not ready to face. Saruman overrules the ring on this point. He will not imprison Gandalf yet. He will let Gandalf go. He will use the time that Gandalf's departure gives him to consolidate, to strengthen, to reach the position of power where the Council's opposition can be weathered. It is the last time Saruman successfully overrules the ring on a major decision. Gandalf leaves Orthanc, rides west. His face, as he crosses the causeway and passes through the outer gate, is the face of a being who has just watched something terrible begin. Part 16. The White Council fractures. Gandalf brings his report to Galadriel, then to Elrond. The three of them, Gandalf, Galadriel, Elrond, convene the most urgent White Council meeting in the Council's long history, though they do not call it by that name, and they do not invite Saruman. A White Council meeting without Saruman. The sheer strangeness of this, the specific quality of something fundamental, has changed that the empty chair at the head of the meeting sets the tone for everything that follows. They have several problems. Problem 1. Saruman has the ring. The most dangerous object in Middle-earth is in the hands of someone who cannot be trusted with it, and who has refused to relinquish it. Problem 2. They cannot take it from him by force. Saruman with the ring outmatches any direct assault that the three of them can mount. Galadriel has Nenya. Elrond has Vilya. Gandalf has Narya. Together, the three elvish ring-bearers might be able to confront Saruman. But the confrontation would be devastating, would damage the very structures they are trying to protect, and might not succeed. Problem 3. Sauron is still out there, still gathering power, still in this timeline reconstituting himself at Dol Guldur. The crisis with Saruman does not make Sauron less dangerous, it makes Sauron significantly more dangerous, because Sauron now has a potential path to the ring that does not require conquering Middle-earth first. Problem 4. Nobody else in Middle-earth knows. The broader alliance, the kings of men, the dwarven lords, the scattered free peoples, none of them know that the most trusted guardian of the age has betrayed that trust. Telling them would be necessary for a unified response. It would also be catastrophic for the morale of every faction that has been depending on the White Council's leadership. Gandalf says, "We cannot fight two wars at once. If we confront Saruman openly, Sauron will simply wait while we exhaust ourselves, then take the ring from whoever survives." Galadriel says, "If we do nothing, Saruman will complete his consolidation of Isengard, attempt to use the ring against Sauron, fail, and then we will fight Sauron with the ring in his hands and Isengard as a base of operations against us." Elrond says nothing for a long time. Then he says, "The ring must be destroyed." Both of them look at him. "The ring must be destroyed," he says again. We have been talking about this as a problem of possession. Who should have it? Whether Saruman can be trusted with it? Whether the council can take it? But we are asking the wrong question. The ring cannot be safely possessed by anyone. Not Saruman, not Galadriel, not any of us. The ring must go to the fire. Gandalf looks at Elrond. And how do you propose we get it to the fire? This is the question that will drive the next phase of the alternate history, and it is a question that nobody in the room has a good answer to. Part 17. The Shire's Ignorance. While Gandalf, Galadriel, and Elrond are wrestling with the question of how to destroy the ring, there is a hobbit in the Shire who does not know that any of this is happening. There is no Frodo in this timeline, no quest, no fellowship, no ring-bearer trudging through the wilderness toward Mordor. The Shire is exactly what it appears to be, a comfortable, insular community of small people whose greatest concern is the quality of the harvest and the specific drama of which family has produced the most impressive mushrooms this season. But the hobbits matter to this story. They matter more than they know, and they matter in a way that we will return to. For now, Bilbo Baggins is in Bag End. In the canonical timeline, Bilbo had the ring for 60 years. In our timeline, Bilbo's adventure happened, the Battle of Five Armies, the death of Smaug, the whole extraordinary journey that Gandalf arranged. But Bilbo came home without the ring, came home with stories and a bit of dwarven gold, and the specific quality of I have seen the world that makes Bilbo permanently pleasantly different from his neighbours. Bilbo has a nephew, a young hobbit named Frodo, recently orphaned, recently adopted, recently brought to live at Bag End. Frodo is 12 years old and reads too much and asks questions that his relatives find exhausting and that Bilbo finds delightful. Frodo does not know that the most important events in the history of Middle-earth are currently unfolding in a tower several hundred miles to the east. Neither does Gandalf stop to think about Frodo. Not yet. The crisis with Saruman is immediate and enormous, and Gandalf's attention is entirely on the immediate and enormous. This is a mistake. The kind of mistake that happens when brilliant beings focus too hard on the crisis directly in front of them and miss the possibility that is peripheral and quiet and entirely unlooked for. We will come back to the hobbits. But first, Saruman is building. Part 18. The new Isengard. What happens to Isengard when the ring accelerates it? In the canonical timeline, Saruman's transformation of Isengard from the ancient ring of trees and the single black tower to the industrial fortress of the War of the Ring takes decades. Gradual, systematic, the specific, long-term planning of a being who expected to have time. In our timeline, the ring compresses the timeline. Not magically, not overnight transformation, but the specific quality of ring-enhanced planning that Saruman is now operating with means that resources are allocated more efficiently, decisions are made more decisively, and the obstacles that previously slowed construction are removed with a directness that Saruman's pre-ring management style would never have employed. Within 2 years of the ring's arrival at Isengard, the outer ring of trees is gone. Not gradually thinned, felled in 3 weeks, organized and systematic, the wood going into the furnaces that feed the new forges. The clearing is methodical, efficient, and the specific quality of it, the feel of a place that used to breathe and now doesn't, is noticed by everyone who passes through the Narn Corunna, the valley of Saruman's road. New structures rise, the underground chambers expand. The orc breeding program, which Saruman had been cautiously developing in the canonical timeline, is accelerated and intensified, because the ring has given Saruman insight into Sauron's own methods in this area. And Saruman's craftsman's mind has taken Sauron's techniques and improved them. The Uruk-hai the orc men crossbreeds, larger and more capable than either, begin to appear in numbers that would not exist for years yet in the canonical story. Gandalf, watching from a distance through his network of informants, receives reports that he shows to Elrond and Galadriel with increasing urgency. "It is accelerating," he says. "Every month it grows faster. The ring is doing this, the ring is sharpening him." Galadriel says, "And Sauron is watching." Sauron is watching all of this, learning it, preparing. This is the shape of the trap that Middle-earth is now inside. Saruman is building toward a confrontation with Sauron. Sauron is letting him build, learning from the ring everything that Saruman does. And the free peoples of Middle-earth are caught between two powers who are preparing for a war that neither of them intends to be good for anyone else. Part 19. Saruman reaches out. Saruman makes his first deliberate political move 2.5 years after finding the ring. And this is where the alternate history becomes genuinely dangerous in a new way. Because Saruman's political move is not towards Sauron. It is toward the free peoples. He approaches Rohan. Rohan is the kingdom immediately south of Isengard, separated by the Westfold Vale, ruled by the Rohirrim, the Horse Lords, the cavalry kingdom that is one of the great military powers of the West. In the canonical timeline, Saruman subverts Rohan through Groma Wormtongue, using the king's counselor as a spy and a poison, gradually undermining Thodin until the king is a shell of himself. In our timeline, Saruman does not subvert. He offers an alliance. This is the ring's influence in its most insidious form, and it looks nothing like corruption. What Saruman proposes to Rohan, to Thodin, who is in the early years of his reign, and who respects and trusts the White Wizard, is a formal defensive alliance. Isengard will provide protection, military technology, and strategic counsel to Rohan. In exchange, Rohan's cavalry will serve as Isengard's mobile strike force in the event of a war against the East. The offer is genuinely good for Rohan. On the surface, the technology that Saruman's forges can provide would make the Rohirrim significantly more effective soldiers. The strategic relationship would give Rohan a powerful ally in a dangerous world. Thodin, who is young and not yet the weathered king of the canonical story, receives this offer with serious interest. Gandalf, who hears about the negotiation through his network, rides to Edoras immediately. Meets with Thodin. Urges him, with a specific Gandalf-level urgency, that he cannot fully explain without revealing everything about the ring, to decline the offer. Thodin, who has been told by Saruman that the ring's greatest enemy is Sauron, and that Saruman's plan is designed to permanently defeat Sauron, and who trusts Saruman's centuries of counsel, does not understand why Gandalf is so vehemently opposed to an alliance that seems strategically sound. The conversation ends without resolution. Thodin says he will consider the matter. Gandalf leaves Edoras feeling the specific anxiety of someone who has not been believed when the stakes of disbelief are enormous. Saruman, informed through his network that Gandalf has been at Edoras, understands that Gandalf will interfere with every political overture he makes. The question of Gandalf becomes more pressing. 3 weeks later, Thodin accepts Saruman's alliance. Part 20. What the ring is doing to Saruman. Let us pause here. We are now roughly 3 years into the alternate history and take stock of what the ring has actually done to Saruman, because the changes are significant, and because understanding them is essential for understanding everything that follows. Saruman's intellect is genuinely enhanced. This is not a trick or an illusion. The ring is amplifying his natural abilities, and those natural abilities are extraordinary. The plans he is making, the strategies he is executing, the specific quality of multi-layered, long-term strategic thinking that is producing the new Isengard, All of this is Saruman operating at the top of his capabilities, and the ring is making those capabilities greater. But the enhancement comes at a cost that Saruman cannot see, because the cost is in the domains he has stopped monitoring. Empathy is the first casualty. Saruman's ability to perceive other beings as having legitimate interests separate from his own plan. This was never Saruman's strongest quality, but it existed, was functional, was part of how he had managed to lead the White Council for centuries. 3 years into ring wearing, the empathy is largely gone. Other beings are now primarily assessed as assets, obstacles, or irrelevancies. Patience is the second casualty. Saruman's pre-ring strategic patience, the quality that made him a long-term planner, that made the council respect his counsel, is being replaced by ring urgency. The ring does not want patience. The ring wants action, wants the confrontation, wants the wearing, the power, the domination. Saruman's long timelines are being compressed, not because the ring forces this, but because the ring's constant presence makes waiting feel like weakness. And most dangerously, objectivity. Saruman's ability to assess his own situation honestly, to see his own plan's flaws, to recognize when he is making mistakes. This has been progressively undermined by the ring's tendency to reflect back to the wearer the image they most want to see of themselves. The ring is not showing Saruman a false reality. The ring is showing Saruman the reading of reality that he most wants to be true. Saruman's plan is working. The alliance is forming. The power is growing. The confrontation with Sauron is becoming more feasible. All of this is true. And none of it is the whole truth. Galadriel, in Lothlorien, looking into the mirror again, sees what Saruman cannot. The ring is teaching Sauron everything Saruman does. Every plan, every alliance, every capability improvement, every strategic innovation, Sauron receives it through the ring's connection. Slower than Saruman perceives, but steadily. Surely. Saruman is spending 3 years building toward a confrontation. Sauron has spent 3 years being briefed on exactly what that confrontation will look like. Part 21. Gandalf's Gamble. Gandalf makes a decision that, in the context of everything he knows, is either the most desperate or the most ingenious move available to him. He decides to go to the Shire. Not because he thinks the Shire is safe. Nothing is safe at this point. Not because he has time for social calls. He goes to the Shire because the answer to the ring problem, the answer that Elrond articulated in that first emergency council meeting, the ring must be destroyed. That answer requires a ring bearer. And a ring bearer, to have any chance of resisting the ring's corruption long enough to get it to Mordor and the Crack of Doom, needs to be someone the ring cannot easily leverage. Gandalf has been thinking about this for 3 years, has turned it over in his mind during every mile of every road, and he keeps arriving at the same conclusion. The conclusion that his colleague hobbits and pipeweed hobbit holes keeps pushing aside with more serious concerns. The specific kind of being who can resist the ring best is not a great and powerful being. Greatness and power are exactly what the ring feeds on. The ring takes what the bearer most desires and makes it enormous. Saruman desired mastery, and the ring made his mastery into a prison. Galadriel desired to nurture and preserve, and the ring would have made that desire into dominion. But a being without grand ambition, a being who most desires comfortable meals and pleasant mornings, and the specific, very small quality of everything is fine in my corner of the world that hobbits embody. The ring cannot easily leverage this. The ring was made to corrupt beings who want to rule. Hobbits do not want to rule. Hobbits want second breakfast. Gandalf arrives at Bag End on a Tuesday morning, and finds Bilbo Baggins in the garden and Frodo Baggins inside, 17 years old, reading Elvish grammar for advanced students at the kitchen table. He sits down with them both. He tells them, not everything, not the full scope of the catastrophe, because the full scope would be paralyzing, but enough. He tells them that there is something very dangerous in the world, something that needs to be taken somewhere very specific and destroyed, something that cannot be carried by any powerful being without becoming a catastrophe. And he is looking for someone small and brave and thoroughly unremarkable in the specific way that unremarkable people are sometimes perfectly suited to remarkable tasks. Bilbo, who has walked to the Lonely Mountain and back and knows more about his own unremarkable courage than most people who have never been tested, says, "Then you want Frodo." Frodo looks up from his grammar book. Part 22. The problem Saruman cannot solve. Meanwhile, Saruman is running into the fundamental structural problem with his entire plan. The problem that the ring has been carefully concealing from his enhanced perception, because revealing it would prompt him to abandon the plan, and the ring does not want him to abandon the plan. The problem is this: to use the One Ring to dominate Sauron's servants, Saruman needs to confront those servants directly. The Nazgul, who serve Sauron through the 9 rings of men, are theoretically subject to the One Ring's command. The Master Ring can, in principle, override the 9. But the override requires sustained direct confrontation, requires the wearer of the One Ring to be genuinely present in a way that exposes them to all of Sauron's forces simultaneously. It is not a chess game where you can remove pieces from a safe distance. It is a wrestling match where you have to be in the room. Saruman has run this calculation 1,000 times, has tried to find a version of his plan that does not require this exposure, has used every theoretical tool at his disposal to model an approach that lets him command the Nazgul without being directly vulnerable to Sauron's counterattack. He cannot find one. The plan was always flawed. Saruman, in his pre-ring thinking, had imagined a gradual approach, a long campaign of incremental domination that would give him time to solidify control of each Nazgul before moving on to the next. But the ring's logic, which Saruman only fully understands now that he is wearing it, does not support this gradualism. The ring is not a scalpel. The ring is a claiming device. When you put it on and reach for the Nazgul, you are not reaching for one of them. You are reaching for all 9 simultaneously. And Sauron, who made all 9 rings that enslave all 9 ringwraiths, Sauron will feel you reaching, and Sauron will be ready. The confrontation that Saruman has been building toward for 3 years requires him to face Sauron directly. Not gradually, not incrementally, all at once, on a day of Sauron's choosing, with Sauron having had 3 years of detailed briefings from the ring about exactly what Saruman's capabilities are. The ring has been walking Saruman, step by patient step, into the position that Sauron needs him to be in for the ring's retrieval to be possible. Saruman begins to understand this. Late one night in the cold upper chambers of Orthanc, going over the calculations for the 100th time, Saruman begins to understand. And the understanding is the most terrifying thing he has experienced since finding the ring. Because it means that the plan was never going to work. That the 3 years of work were not preparation for victory. They were preparation for surrender. He takes the ring off, sits with it in front of him on the table, and for the first time in 3 years, in the ring's absence, thinks clearly enough to ask the question he should have asked on the first day: why did the ring let me find it? Part 23. The ring's strategy. Here is the answer that Saruman, in his clarity of ring absence, works out. The ring wanted to be found. Not by Saruman specifically, the ring does not have preferences about who finds it, only about what finding it accomplishes. What finding it by someone of Saruman's power accomplishes is this. It removes the ring from the possibility of being destroyed by parties who have neither the power to use it nor the wisdom to avoid its corruption. A ring found by a hobbit can be destroyed. A hobbit has no ambition for the ring to leverage. The Fellowship, that specific Tolkien-designed coalition of the willing, was precisely calibrated to have enough diversity of purpose and enough smallness at its center that the ring could not easily redirect the quest. Frodo, Sam, the specific quality of hobbit, ordinariness. These are the ring's natural enemies. A ring found by Saruman cannot be destroyed. Saruman is not going to carry the ring to Mordor. Saruman is not going to drop his entire strategic project and walk into enemy territory on a suicide mission to unmake the source of his power. The ring has taken itself off the table as a destroyable object the moment it arrived at Isengard. But more than that, the ring in Saruman's possession has a specific strategic value that the ring's Sauron-shaped will perceives and exploits. Saruman, who the Free Peoples trusted and who has turned against them. Saruman, who has built Isengard into a fortress. Saruman, who has formed an alliance with Rohan that will confuse Rohan's response when the real war begins. Saruman as Sauron's unwitting advance agent, the being who has spent 3 years weakening the West's strategic position while believing he was strengthening his own. The ring found Saruman because Saruman was the perfect tool for dividing the West against itself before Sauron made his real move. Saruman sits in Orthanc with this understanding and looks at the ring on the table. And then he does something that surprises even himself. He picks it up. And he keeps it. Part 24. Why he keeps it. This is the character beat that separates this story from a simple tale of corruption and doom, and it is the beat that is most true to who Tolkien's Saruman actually is. Saruman keeps the ring because even now, even with the full understanding of how he has been manipulated, even with the cold clarity of having thought outside the ring for 20 minutes, even now, Saruman believes he can still win. Saruman believes that the plan can be salvaged, that his understanding of the ring's strategy is itself a form of power, that knowing you are being manipulated is halfway to overcoming the manipulation, that he, who has studied the ring longer and more deeply than anyone, who has resisted it more successfully than any bearer in history, who has driven off the Nazgul and built the greatest military complex in the history of the West, and formed alliances with the greatest cavalry kingdom in Middle-earth, that he can find the adjustment to the plan that makes it work. He puts the ring back on, and this decision, this single, comprehensible, entirely human-scale decision, is the decision that ends the alternate history's possibility of a good outcome for Saruman. Because he is right about almost everything he just understood. He is right that the ring is manipulating him. He is right about Sauron's strategy. He is right that the confrontation he has been preparing for is a trap. He understands all of this correctly and completely. And then he decides that understanding a trap is the same as being able to escape it. It is not. The ring goes back on his finger. The clarity lasts perhaps another 10 minutes. And then the ring-enhanced perception reasserts itself, the sharper, more confident, more capable version of himself that wearing the ring produces, and the cold understanding of a moment ago begins to seem like timidity, like pessimism, like the specific kind of overcaution that has kept lesser beings from attempting great things. I know more than any of them, Saruman thinks. I know what the ring is doing. That is the advantage. That is what makes me different. The ring on his finger agrees with every word. Part 24, B. Gollum's different story. There is a creature wandering the wilds of Middle-earth in this timeline who occupies a different position than he does in the canonical story. Gollum, Smaugol, originally a store hobbit of the Gladden Fields, did not find the ring, did not spend 500 years in the Misty Mountains, did not lose the ring to Bilbo. In our timeline, the ring passed Smaugol entirely. The ring was lying in the mud of the Gladden Fields when Smaugol and Dagol were fishing nearby. In the canonical story, the ring reached for Dagol and through Dagol reached for Smaugol, and the rest was murder and obsession and 5 centuries of terrible extended life under the Misty Mountains. In our timeline, Saruman's agents found the ring before Dagol's boat passed that particular riverbend. The ring went east to Isengard, not north to the mountains. Smaugol lived and aged and died a normal death, unremarkable, unmourned, unmythologized, no ring given extended life, no transformation into the creature, no Gollum. Just an ordinary hobbit relative who fished in the Gladden Fields and went home for dinner and died in his own bed some decades later, without ever knowing that the most important object in the history of the world had once been within a mile of his fishing line. This seems like a mercy. And in one sense it is. Smaugol did not become the broken, wretched, pitiful thing that the canonical Gollum is, did not suffer 5 centuries in the dark, did not endure Sauron's torture or the burning of the Emyn Muil. But in another sense, something is missing from this story. Something specific and significant. Because in the canonical story, Gollum's role, reduced to its essence, is the role of the cautionary tale made flesh. The being who shows what the ring does to someone who wanted it too much and held it too long. The creature who is both victim and villain, and who ultimately, in his specific terrible ring-obsessed way, saves the world by doing the thing that neither Frodo nor Saruman could do, dropping the ring into the fire, because the ring would not let him not. In our story, there is no Gollum to provide that specific salvation, which is one of the reasons that Frodo, who lacks both Gollum's centuries of ring-specific madness and the canonical story's 60 years of ring proximity through Bilbo, has to be a different kind of ring-bearer. Has to be the specific kind that resists not through the ring's hunger, but through the ring's absence in him. Has to be the hobbit who is so thoroughly uninteresting to the ring that the ring cannot be bothered to fully engage. The absence of Gollum is the absence of the specific safety net that the canonical story provides. Frodo must do this cleanly, consciously, without the accidental salvation of someone else's obsession to catch the ring if Frodo's will fails. This is why Gandalf is so careful, why he chooses Frodo specifically rather than any other hobbit, why he spends 3 weeks in Bag End before the quest begins, not explaining the mission but having tea and talking about ordinary things, calibrating his understanding of exactly how thoroughly ordinary this particular hobbit is. Frodo's ordinariness is not incidental, it is the plan. Part 25. Frodo enters the story. Gandalf explains the situation to Frodo with characteristic economy, tells him enough that Frodo understands the shape of the task, not so much that the shape becomes paralyzing. This is Gandalf's specific gift, the calibration of revelation, giving people what they can use without drowning them in what they cannot. Frodo is not Frodo of the canonical quest. He has not had 60 years of ring exposure through Bilbo. He does not have the specific, slowly building, this thing is precious dependency that the canonical Frodo inherited along with the ring. He is 17 years old, bookish, curious, and entirely untested. But he has something that Saruman, with all his power and knowledge, does not have. The specific genetic inheritance of the Baggins Took line, which is the most adventurous and least greed-prone bloodline in the Shire, and a fundamental absence of the ambitions that the ring exploits. Gandalf does not ask Frodo to be a hero. He asks Frodo to be small. To be the specific, unheroic, I just want to go home quality of person that the ring cannot shape into anything. To carry what needs to be carried not through strength, but through the lack of the particular weakness that the ring requires. Frodo says yes with the specific quality of not fully understanding what he is agreeing to that characterizes his canonical counterpart, and that is, in a deep sense, exactly right for this task. The people who fully understand what they are agreeing to are the people the ring can reach. But there is a problem that Gandalf has not yet solved. The ring is not in Mordor, waiting to be carried to the crack of doom. The ring is in Isengard. In a tower, worn on the finger of the most powerful wizard in Middle-earth, who is surrounded by an army of Uruk-hai and backed by the cavalry of Rohan, and who will not willingly give the ring to anyone, least of all a Shire hobbit with a grammar book. The quest, in this timeline, is not to carry the ring from the Shire to Mordor. The quest in this timeline is to first get the ring, and only then carry it to destruction. Which means the Fellowship in this timeline has to take the ring from Saruman. Part 26. The Fellowship of a different kind. The coalition that Gandalf assembles is different from the canonical Fellowship, because the problem is different. He still needs Sam. Samwise Gamgee, Frodo's gardener and closest friend, who insisted on coming with Frodo the moment he found out what Frodo had agreed to, who has absolutely no qualifications for any of this, and whose presence is therefore almost entirely beyond the ring's capacity to exploit. Sam comes because Sam loves Frodo. That is the whole of it, and it is enough. He still needs Aragorn. Aragorn, the heir of Isildur, the Nedain ranger who carries the canonical story's thread of kingship, whose involvement is essential not because of what he can do in the immediate crisis, but because of what he represents for the world after the crisis. The world that comes out of this needs a king. It needs Aragorn. But more immediately, Aragorn's quality as a ranger, his ability to move unseen, his deep knowledge of terrain and enemy forces, these are what the immediate problem requires. He still needs Legolas and Gimli, the elf and the dwarf, because the specific coalition they represent, the reaching across ancient enmity to achieve a common purpose, is part of what must survive this story. And because both of them have specific capabilities that the plan to reach Saruman requires, he does not need Boromir. The reasons Boromir was in the canonical Fellowship to represent men, to carry the story of Gondor, to provide the specific tragic beat of the ring's first human victim in the Fellowship, these reasons do not fully apply here. Gondor is not directly threatened yet in the same way. And more importantly, Boromir's specific vulnerability. The desire to use the ring for Gondor's defense is exactly the kind of leverageable ambition that the ring turns. They cannot bring someone whose greatest desire is to wield a ring of power into a mission whose purpose is to take a ring of power from its current wielder. Instead, Gandalf brings someone unexpected. He brings Merry and Pippin. Both of them, not as afterthoughts, not as stowaways, as deliberate inclusions. Because Merry and Pippin, who are smarter than they appear and braver than they know, and whose primary mode of engagement with dangerous situations is irreverence rather than awe, provide something the mission needs. The quality of people who will not be impressed by Saruman, who have not spent years building up the specific mental architecture of Saruman, is the greatest mind in Middle-earth that makes other beings hesitate before him. Hobbits do not hesitate before impressive authority figures. They ask what's for dinner. Part 27. Orthanc. The plan is not subtle. The plan does not have room for subtlety. Saruman, ring enhanced, will perceive any attempt at deception or maneuvering long before it can be executed. The ring gives him an awareness of approaching threats that cannot be fully countered by elvish stealth or ranger craft. Any approach to Orthanc that relies on not being seen will fail. The plan, therefore, relies on being exactly what it appears to be. Gandalf and 5 companions walking to the gates of Isengard and asking for admittance. The calculated audacity of this is, Gandalf admits to Galadriel before they depart, either brilliance or madness, and he is not entirely sure which. The calculation is, Saruman will perceive the ring vulnerability of Frodo immediately, and will either try to take Frodo's lack of ring as a lure, which means they get inside, or dismiss the small party as irrelevant and not a real threat, which also means they get inside. What Saruman will not expect is that the unringed hobbit at the center of the party is the mission, the objective. The specific, carefully prepared, the ring cannot reach him ring-bearer in waiting. They arrive at the gates in the late afternoon. Saruman's orcs, watching from the walls, do not immediately attack, because Gandalf is still recognizably Gandalf, and Saruman has not yet definitively decided what to do with Gandalf. And the ring, which wants Gandalf inside the tower rather than outside where he can organize resistance, counsels Saruman toward admitting the party. This is the ring's second major miscalculation, and it is a mirror of the first, just as the ring prevented Saruman from imprisoning Gandalf at their confrontation. The ring now maneuvers Saruman into admitting Gandalf through the gates. Because the ring wants Frodo close. Can feel something in Frodo, some specific quality of potential bearer that the ring has been calibrated, at the deepest level of its making, to seek. The ring wants to assess Frodo directly. Wants to gauge whether Frodo is a viable transfer option. The ring is, in the final analysis, still Sauron's tool. And Sauron's primary objective is always the ring's return to Sauron's hand, by any route available. Part 28. Inside Orthanc. The meeting in the High Chamber of Orthanc is the most dangerous 10 minutes in the alternate history. Saruman sits at the head of his council table. The 4 hobbits, Gandalf and Aragorn, arranged before him. Legolas and Gimli left outside, Saruman admitted the party but not all of it, and 2 fewer people inside the tower is 2 fewer problems for him to manage. Saruman looks at Frodo immediately. Not at Gandalf, at Frodo. The ring-enhanced perception has zeroed in on the hobbit with the specific quality of a weapon sensing a target. And Saruman's expression, reading it correctly, is the expression of someone who has just understood something. You brought a hobbit, Saruman says. Not as an insult, as a statement of dawning comprehension. You intend to destroy it. Gandalf says yes. This is the moment when Saruman's plan, or rather the plan he has convinced himself he has recovered, the salvaged version, the this time I understand the trap version, this is when the plan and the reality fully separate. Because Saruman has, in the weeks since his moment of clarity, convinced himself that he can use the ring against Sauron, and that knowing he is being manipulated is protection enough. He has built an entire internal architecture around this conviction. The ring has helped him build it, has been assisting with the mental construction every time the ring went back on his finger and the clarity receded. And now Gandalf is sitting across the table telling him that the ring can be destroyed. That there is a hobbit here who can carry it to the fire. That's the answer Elrond identified. The only real answer, the one that doesn't end with Sauron winning through the ring, is available right now in this room. Saruman looks at Frodo, and the ring on his finger reaches toward Frodo. And Frodo, 17 years old, completely untrained, entirely without the 60 years of ring resistance that the canonical Frodo built up gradually, Frodo feels the ring reaching toward him. And Frodo says, no. Part 29. The Battle for the Ring. What happens next is not a physical battle. There are no swords drawn in this chamber, no spells exchanged, no dramatic clash of visible forces. What happens is entirely interior. An act of will happening in the space between Saruman and Frodo, mediated through the ring's reaching. The ring is trying to transfer its allegiance. The ring has always been capable of this, has always had the ability to judge when a current bearer is no longer the most viable host for its primary purpose, which is to return to Sauron. In the canonical story, the ring briefly attempted to abandon Frodo in Moria when the physical destruction seemed likely. Here, the ring is making a more deliberate attempt, assessing Frodo as a potential bearer, reaching toward him, feeling for the shape of his desires, and finding almost nothing to grab onto. This is the Hobbit's specific gift and the ring's specific nightmare. Frodo's deepest desire in this moment is to go home. To go back to Bag End, to make tea with Bilbo and argue about Elvish grammar and never have anything to do with wizards or rings or any of this. The desire is entirely genuine, entirely specific, and entirely ring-proof. You cannot leverage I want to go home into dominion over Middle-earth. There is no path from there to anywhere the ring can use. The ring's reach toward Frodo finds nothing and rebounds, returns to Saruman. And in the rebounding, in the specific quality of the ring tried to leave that Saruman experiences as a sudden hollow terror, Saruman understands, really understands, for the second time and now permanently, the ring was going to leave him. Given a viable host, the ring was going to abandon him and move on. 3 years. 3 years of work and sacrifice and moral compromise and the specific, devastating personal cost of what he has become. 3 years. And the ring was going to abandon him the moment something more useful came along. He takes the ring off. He takes it off and he places it on the table between himself and Frodo, and the ring sits there in the lamplight between the former head of the White Council and the 17-year-old hobbit, and Saruman says, in a voice that is very quiet and very old, "Take it, before I change my mind." Part 30. The cost of clarity. The moment the ring leaves Saruman's finger is the moment Saruman becomes visible to himself for the first time in 3 years. The comprehensive, terrible, every decision laid bare visibility that removing the ring after prolonged wearing produces. He can see it all. Every compromise. Every lie, to the council, to Thodin, to Gandalf, to himself. Every moment where the ring's influence shaped his decisions and he chose to accept the shaping, because the shaping pointed in the direction he already wanted to go. The Uruk-hai in the pits. The trees cut down. The alliance with Rohan sold under false pretenses. Bilbo's ring not found, because if Bilbo had found the ring, Gandalf would have been focused on the Shire and not on Isengard, and Saruman would have had more time. One of the ring's minor strategic adjustments was making sure Saruman's agents swept the Gladdenfields region just thoroughly enough to find the ring, but not so obviously that Bilbo stumbled across it first. The ring had managed even that detail. Saruman has been used. Comprehensively, expertly, at every level. Used by an artifact he believed he understood. Serving a master he believed he was preparing to defeat. 3 years of his life, 3 years of the West's strategic stability, 3 years of Rohan's misplaced trust, all of it fed into Sauron's preparation. Frodo picks up the ring. This is the moment that the Hobbit shows the quality that Gandalf identified. Frodo picks up the ring, holds it in his palm, feels the specific quality of it, the weight, the warmth, the reaching, and puts it not on his finger, but in his pocket. A deliberate choice. Not putting it on. Not yet. Not here. Sam, who has been watching this entire scene with the expression of someone desperately trying to keep up with events that are several layers above his normal experience, says, "Right. So we're going to Mordor then." Frodo says, "Yes." Gandalf says, "Yes." And he looks at Saruman, at the man sitting at the head of the table, drained, diminished. The 3-year intensity of ring enhancement draining out of him in the specific way of a tide going out and leaving rocks behind, and Gandalf's expression is not triumph. It is grief. The grief of watching someone he has known for 2,000 years arrive at this particular, specific ruin. He says, "Come with us, Saruman. What's in Mordor needs to be ended. You know its structure better than anyone. If you come," Saruman says, "I cannot. Not won't. Cannot." Because Saruman knows what 3 years of ring-wearing does to a Maya's spiritual integrity. Knows the specific damage that has been done to his connection with his own nature, his own purpose. The specific quality of what he was created for that Ol intended when he shaped Saruman's being. The trip to Mordor, the physical demands, the spiritual demands, the ring's proximity even when worn by someone else, Saruman does not trust himself not to take it back. He says, "I'll hold the alliance with Rohan. Give you the road through Isengard. Clear the path as far as I can reach." He says, "That is all I have left to offer." Part 31. The road through Isengard. Frodo and Sam and Gandalf and Aragorn and Merry and Pippin walk out of Orthanc in the early morning and through the gates of Isengard and south toward the long road to Mordor. Saruman watches from the window. He has spent the night issuing orders, quietly, methodically. The last of the ring's gifted efficiency being spent on something that is the opposite of what the ring intended it for. Messages to his agents, countermanding his previous instructions. Orders to his Uruk-hai to stand down from border positions. Coded communication to Thodin, careful, calibrated. Not a full confession, but enough to begin the reversal of the alliance that Saruman sold under false pretenses. It will not be enough. The damage to Rohan's trust will take years to repair. The Uruk-hai exist, cannot be uninvented. The industrial machinery of Isengard exists. The trees that were cut down are gone. These are the permanent costs, the entries in the ledger that cannot be crossed out. But the road south is clear. And Frodo has the ring in his pocket. And Gandalf is with him. Legolas and Gimli, retrieving their weapons and their dignity from the outer courtyard where they spent the night under guard, fall in alongside the party. Legolas watches the tower recede behind them and says nothing for a long time. Then he says to Gimli, "The White Wizard gave it up." Gimli, who has a fundamentally practical relationship with his own astonishment, says, "Good. Now let's not waste it." Part 32. Sauron moves. Everything changes the moment the ring leaves Orthanc. Sauron has been receiving the ring's signal from Isengard for 3 years, has been tracking it, learning from it, building his plans around it. And then the signal changes. Not stops, not disappears, but moves. The ring is moving south, away from Isengard, carried by a bearer whose signal is almost undetectable, but whose direction is unmistakable. The ring is going to Mordor. Sauron understands what this means immediately. The ring has changed hands, has been given to someone or taken by someone. And whoever has it now is heading, with the specific quality of deliberate intention, toward the one location where the ring can be destroyed. Sauron does not have time to be subtle, does not have the 3-year luxury of patient surveillance that he enjoyed while the ring sat in Isengard. The ring is moving, and the ring's new bearer, whoever they are, has the intention and apparently the will to follow through. He sends all 9 Nazgul. Not 2, not a selective deployment, all 9. The Witch King of Angmar at the head of them, riding with the specific quality of purpose that the Nazgul express when Sauron's own urgency drives them. They are visible this time, are making no attempt at concealment, because concealment is no longer the priority. Stopping the ring is the priority. The 9 riders head south and west, toward the Rohan border, toward the road that the ring must travel to reach Mordor. And Saruman, watching his intelligence network light up with reports of the Nazgul's movement, makes his final decision. He commits every military resource he has left to the southern road. Sends the Uruk-hai he told himself were defensive tools out as an active blocking force, not against the Fellowship, but between the Fellowship and the Nazgul. Buys them time. Buys Frodo time. Isengard's army, built to be the spearhead of Saruman's campaign against Sauron, becomes a rearguard for a hobbit. Part 32b. Aragorn's Different War. In the canonical story, Aragorn's journey to reclaim the throne of Gondor is intertwined with the War of the Ring at every level. He is revealed at Helm's Deep. He takes the paths of the dead. He commands the armies at the Black Gate. His kingship is proven by combat, by leadership, by the specific earned quality of a man who has spent 80 years in the wilderness, preparing for a moment he was never certain would come. In our timeline, Aragorn's path is different. The War of the Ring in our timeline does not require the full mobilization of Gondor in the same way. There is no Pelennor Fields battle on the same scale. No siege of Minas Tirith in the same form, because Sauron's primary military attention has been directed toward recovering the ring from Isengard and then chasing it south, not toward the systematic conquest of the West. But Gondor still needs Aragorn. The claim still exists. And Aragorn, who has been operating in the background of this alternate history as Gandalf's most capable ranger ally, the man who knows the roads and the terrain and the enemies and who carries no ambitions that the ring can leverage, Aragorn arrives at Minas Tirith not as a conquering hero, but as a returning king who has been doing the unglamorous work of keeping the quest alive. The difference matters. In the canonical story, Aragorn's kingship is validated by war, is proven in the furnace of the greatest battles the West has seen in 3,000 years. In our timeline, Aragorn's kingship is validated differently, by the patient. Years long, I was here doing the work when no one was watching quality of service that turns out to be the truer test. There is something Tolkienian in this alternate validation. The idea that the king proves himself not just in the moments of high drama, but in the thousands of ordinary moments before the drama. In the ranging, the protecting, the keeping safe of travelers and roads and borders. Aragorn has been doing this all his life. He does it in this timeline too, on the road south, with Frodo, as the rearguard action fights the Nazgul and as Frodo walks steadily toward the fire. When Aragorn reaches Minas Tirith, when the steward looks at him and sees the healing hands and the ancient lineage and the elvish star at his breast, the validation comes not from the battlefield he just won, but from the battlefield he just helped Frodo survive. From being one of the specific, essential people who got the ring-bearer from Orthanc to the crack of doom and made sure it was destroyed. Faramir, who sees this with the specific Faramir quality of perception that makes him one of the most perceptive beings in the canonical story, and in this one, Faramir bows to Aragorn before the steward does. Because Faramir understands, in the way that people who have studied history and lore understand, what the last month has actually contained. Part 33. Frodo on the road. What does Frodo experience, carrying the ring on the long road south? Here is what we know about the ring's effect on an untrained bearer of modest power. The ring is patient. The ring that could not leverage Frodo's desires in Orthanc could not find the specific shape of ambition that it requires. The ring in transit has time, has miles, has every dark night and every moment of exhaustion and fear on a road that is increasingly hostile to recalibrate its approach. The ring cannot make Frodo want to rule, but it can make Frodo want to be safe, can whisper, under the specific duress of the road, that putting the ring on would make the danger go away, that invisible is safe, that the Nazgul cannot find you if you cannot be found. The ring finds the desire it can reach, not ambition, but fear, and works with that. Frodo is aware of this. Gandalf has explained it to him, has been as honest with him as Gandalf knows how to be about the ring's mechanisms, and Frodo's specific gift, the quality that his youth and his bookishness and his specific lineage has given him, is the ability to name what is happening to him. When the ring whispers, Frodo knows it is the ring, can distinguish between his own fear and the ring's amplification of his fear. This is not full immunity. It is not even safety. But it is the specific, partial, day by day, I see what you're doing and I'm going forward anyway quality of resistance that is what the quest requires. Sam helps. Sam, who has absolutely no relevant training and who would normally be entirely beyond his depth in a situation of this magnitude, Sam helps by being Sam, by producing food at regular intervals, by asking questions that are very slightly too ordinary for the gravity of the situation, by having a completely comfortable relationship with the reality that Frodo is his friend, and he is going to keep being his friend regardless of what malevolent artifacts say about it. The ring cannot find purchase in the space between Frodo and Sam. The ring, which was built to isolate its bearer, encounters a friendship that is too thoroughly unambitious to leverage. Sam does not want power. Sam does not want glory. Sam wants Frodo to be okay, and wants to see what Oliphant looks like up close. The ring reaches for this and finds nothing but warmth, and produces nothing but a mild frustration at the bottom of Frodo's pocket. Merry and Pippin are several paces back, debating the relative merits of different Shire cheeses and only occasionally remembering that they are in a story that matters. Part 34. The Isengard Rearguard. The battle between the Uruk-hai and the pursuing Nazgul fought across 3 days in the rough country south of the Nan Karuna, in terrain that Saruman had selected years ago as optimal for defensive operations, is the strangest engagement in the alternate history's military record. The Uruk-hai are not fighting for Saruman's ambitions. They are not fighting for domination or conquest. They are fighting for a purpose that Saruman has communicated to them with the specific ring residual clarity that he still possesses even without the ring. Hold the road south. Do not let the Riders of Shadow past. The Nazgul do not typically engage armies directly. The Nazgul are instruments of terror and assassination, and not designed for sustained engagement with a large disciplined force in favorable terrain. But they have Sauron's specific urgency pressing them forward, and so they fight. The battle costs Saruman half his Uruk-hai. It costs the Nazgul nothing. You cannot kill the ringwraiths with conventional weapons, and the battle ends not with Nazgul destroyed, but with the Isengard force exhausted and the Nazgul pushing through and continuing south. But it costs them 2 days. 2 days during which Frodo has been walking toward Mordor with only the normal dangers of the road to contend with. 2 days of lead time that Saruman's army bought at the price of its own destruction. When the last Uruk High Captain sends his final report to Orthanc, a brief blunt soldier's dispatch, we held 3 days. They are past us now. The road beyond is yours to clear. Saruman reads it in the tower room where he has been spending the nights since Frodo left, looking south out the window, and feels something specific and unexpected. He feels like himself. For the first time in 3 years, he feels approximately like the being he was before the ring came. Not restored, not healed. The damage from 3 years of ring-wearing does not vanish with the ring's physical absence, but himself. His own purpose is his own. His assessment of the situation unfiltered by 1,000 small adjustments that he had not noticed happening. He sits down and writes a letter to Galadriel. He writes it as an honest account, not a justification, not a defense, not a carefully constructed document for posterity. Just what happened, what he thought, what the ring did, what it felt like from the inside, what he understands now. It is the bravest thing he has done in 3 years. Part 35. Thodin hears the truth. Saruman sends Grimbold, one of his most trusted non-orc agents, a Dunlending soldier who has served Isengard for 15 years, to Edoras with the letter he owes Thodin. The letter is a confession. Not of everything. Some of what Saruman has done cannot be confessed without destroying what little credibility he has left, and Saruman is still Saruman, still operating with the craftsman's instinct that some information is worth more kept than revealed. But the letter tells Thodin that the alliance was offered under false pretenses, that the ring was involved, that Thodin's cavalry should not be committed to any action in the name of Isengard. Thodin reads the letter in his hall with Ma at the door and Gamling at his side, and the specific expression of a man learning that a trusted advisor has not been what he seemed. It is not the ravaged, paralyzed expression of the canonical Wormtongue afflicted Thodin. Thodin in this timeline has not been slowly poisoned by proximity to ring corruption, has simply been told a partial truth about a wizard's motives, and has believed it, the way people believe partial truths told by credible sources. The expression is something colder and more controlled. The expression of a king who has made a strategic mistake and is deciding what to do about it. What Thodin does about it is, he does not send the cavalry to stop Frodo and the ring. He does not act in Sauron's interests regardless of the Nazgul pressure that, within days, will reach Rohan's borders. What Thodin does is ride to Helm's Deep and prepare it as a defensive position. The cavalry stays in the Westfold, and when the Nazgul reach the Rohan border and demand passage and information about a hobbit bearing a gold ring, they find no cooperation. Find a kingdom that has been misled but not broken. Find riders who look at the shadow creatures and say, collectively, no. The Nazgul push past. They always push past. But Rohan's refusal to cooperate means the Nazgul cannot get the ring's specific location from Rohan's intelligence network, cannot determine which road Frodo took through the southern reaches. Every interaction with Rohan costs them time. Time that Frodo is spending walking. Part 36. The Chase. The last phase of the alternate history is essentially a race. Frodo and Sam and their companions moving through the southern reaches of Middle-earth with Gandalf's guidance, taking routes that avoid the main roads, heading toward the borders of Mordor. Behind them, 9 ringwraiths pushing south with Sauron's urgency driving them. The geography of this race matters. In the canonical story, the Fellowship had all of Middle-earth to traverse, the entire length of the continent, from the Shire through Rivendell through Moria or the Gap of Rohan, and down through Gondor, and finally to Mordor's borders. The journey was hundreds of miles, The fellowship this story needs takes a different shape, is starting further south, and has less total distance to cover, having begun at Isengard rather than the Shire. The Anduin, the Southern Passage, the Emyn Muil. But there is a piece of the canonical story that this alternate history requires, and it is the piece that seems like a detour, but is not. They need Gollum. Gollum, in this timeline, has been in the wild for decades, never found the ring in the first place, never had those 5 centuries of unnatural extended life that ring possession gave him. Without the ring, Gollum's path was entirely different. Degol and Smagol fished at the Gladden fields, found nothing, went home, and Smagol lived out a shortened, ordinary, miserable life, and died, having never held the thing he could not stop dreaming about. The creature wandering the Emyn Muil in this timeline is not a former ring-bearer. He is something rarer and sadder, a being who spent decades consumed by the want of a thing he never possessed, hearing whispers from a ring that reached for him across the mud of a river, and then was taken before he could find it. He knows the shape of the ring's desire without ever having held it. He knows the roads to Mordor, because the ring's hunger drove him east across the years, seeking the source of the whisper, drawn towards Sauron's realm with the specific quality of obsession that the ring had already planted in him from across the distance. Sauron had no use for him. He had never held the ring, and therefore had no information worth extracting. But he survived, barely, and he knows the back ways into Mordor, the way only someone who has been circling a terrible place for years can know them. Aragorn finds him lurking in the approaches to the Emyn Muil with the specific quality of deranged persistence that Gollum always carries. And Frodo, who has studied enough lore at Bilbo's table to understand roughly what Gollum is and what he was, makes the canonical decision that the canonical Frodo made. He deserves pity. And we might need him. Sam, predictably, has extremely specific reservations. Gollum leads them through the dead marshes. The marshes are the same in any timeline, grey, cold, the faces of the dead visible in the water, the specific, terrible beauty of a place where every step is a decision, and every decision might be your last. Frodo feels the ring most strongly in the marshes, where the weight of death and loss and the specific quality of all things pass is concentrated enough to give the ring's whisper a resonance it lacks in the open road. He does not put it on. Part 37. The Witch King finds the trail. The Nazgul find the trail at the Dead Marshes' eastern edge. The Witch King of Angmar, leading the Nine, has been following the ring's faint signal. Faint because Frodo does not wear it, faint because Frodo's very ordinariness muffles the ring's presence, but following it nonetheless. The signal strengthened in the marshes, where Frodo's resistance was under the most pressure, and where the ring briefly, in the worst moments, increased its ambient output trying to get Frodo to put it on. The Witch King knows the bearing now, knows they are perhaps 2 days behind. Sauron, through the connection that the Witch King maintains, increases the pressure. The urgency that has been driving the Nazgul since Isengard is now something more than urgency, is panic at the specific Sauron scale level where panic looks like absolute merciless focus. The ring is days from the fire. The ring is days from being unmade. 3 years of preparation, 3 years of using Saruman, 3 years of patient watching, all of it comes down to whether the Nine can close 2 days of distance before a hobbit reaches a volcano. The Nine do not sleep. They ride. Gandalf knows they are close, has been aware of the Witch King's approach since the marshes, the specific cold quality of approaching Nazgul presence that registers on his perception is getting louder, more insistent, more there. He makes a decision. He tells Frodo, "Go ahead. Sam goes with you. The rest of us hold here." Frodo says, "You can't hold 9 of them." Gandalf says no, but I only need to hold them long enough. Part 38. The Last Stand. Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Merry and Pippin stand on a rocky defile in the approaches to Mordor's outer borders as the Nine come down from the north. This is not the bridge of Khazad-dûm. This is a different stand, in a different place, against different enemies. But the quality of it, the specific, this is what we are and this is what we do, quality of choosing to stand when running would be the rational option. This quality is the same. Gandalf's staff illuminates the defile. The cold fire that the wizards command, the specific quality of Maya-level spiritual force expressed as physical light, Gandalf deploys it not as a weapon, but as a wall. Not to destroy the Nazgul. You cannot destroy the Nazgul with light, only drive them back, temporarily, in the way that light drives back shadows. But temporarily is enough. Aragorn knows this fight, knows it in the specific, Dunedain way of someone whose entire life has been preparation for the defense of the things that matter against the things that threaten them. He fights the Nazgul not expecting to win, but expecting to give Frodo 20 more minutes. 40 more. Every minute a gift. Every minute Frodo walking toward the fire. Merry and Pippin, who have been in this story largely as comic relief and moral ballast, find in this moment the specific quality of courage that the canonical story gives them. The Hobbit courage that looks like recklessness from the outside, but is actually the specific, entirely clear about what matters quality of beings who have decided that their friend is more important than their safety. Merry takes down a Nazgul's horse with a sword thrust he has no business being capable of. Pippin, screaming something entirely unsuitable for a heroic moment, creates enough of a distraction at a critical juncture to buy Gandalf 30 seconds of renewed light. The battle is not won. The Nazgul cannot be stopped by a party of 6 against 9. But it is slowed. It is bought. Every exchange of blade and staff and light buys another minute. And then, from the south, from the direction of Mordor, from the specific location of the cracks of doom themselves, a light. Not the cold fire of Gandalf's staff. A hot light. An internal light, the light of something being unmade. The ring is gone. Part 39. The unmaking. What does it feel like when the one ring is unmade? In the canonical story, the immediate physical consequences are the collapse of Barad-dûr, the destruction of the Black Gate, the dissolution of Sauron's direct capacity to act on the physical world. The metaphysical consequences are the undoing of the ring's specific structure, the complex, woven, Sauron-crafted reality-shaping architecture that has existed for 3,000 years. The undoing of this as a sudden, total, gone. In our timeline, the consequences are the same and different. Same, Sauron's power collapses. The Nazgul dissolve. The shadow over Mordor disperses. Different. The person who carried the ring into the fire is not the same person, and the road that brought the ring to the fire was not the same road. Frodo drops the ring into the crack of doom. Not in a moment of weakness where Gollum must take it, not that specific, salvation through another's vice quality of the canonical destruction. Frodo drops it deliberately, in a moment of complete clarity, because the ring at the lip of the crack has finally run out of things to leverage. The ambition-shaped tool has found a bearer with no ambition. The fear amplifier has found a bearer who has been naming and facing his fear for 2 months straight. The isolation engine has found a bearer accompanied by his best friend, who has literally never for one moment considered going home without him. Frodo drops the ring, watches it fall, watches the fire take it, feels the ring's absence like the cessation of a sound he had stopped noticing. Sam says, "There it goes then." Frodo says, "Yes, They sit down together on a rock above the crack of doom and wait to be rescued or die, and either way, it is done. Part 40. What Saruman becomes. The hardest part of this alternate history to answer is not what happens to Middle-earth. The hardest part is what happens to Saruman. In the canonical story, Saruman ends in the Shire, shrunken, bitter, taking petty revenge on the small people who were beneath his notice when he was powerful, dying at Gurma's hands over a knife and a fit of rage. It is a deliberately diminished ending for a being of great stature. A portrait of what spite becomes when there is nothing left to sustain it. In our timeline, Saruman is standing at Orthanc's window when the ring is unmade, feels the specific quality of something vast departing that the ring's destruction produces in any being sensitive enough to perceive it. Feels, specifically, the absence of the ring's 3-year presence in his life, feels the shape of the hole the ring left, the way you feel the shape of a tooth that has been removed. He goes to his desk, takes out the journal he stopped writing in 6 weeks after the ring arrived, begins to write again. He writes for 12 hours. Everything, the complete account. The finding of the ring and the studying of the ring and the wearing of the ring and the specific, step-by-step process by which it shaped his decisions and distorted his perceptions. He writes the Nazgul confrontation and the White Council deception and the Rohan alliance and the moment of clarity and the putting the ring back on and the meeting with Frodo and the giving it up. He writes what it felt like to be intelligent enough to understand what was happening to him, and not intelligent enough to stop it. When he is finished, he seals the journal and addresses it to Galadriel, with a note that says, "This is what the ring does to someone who knows what it is." It should be read by anyone who thinks that understanding the danger is protection from the danger. He sends the journal with Grimbold and then sits in the empty chair in the empty chamber at the top of the empty tower and rests his head on his hands. Part 40b. What the 3 rings do when the one is gone. In the canonical story, the destruction of the One Ring unmakes the power of the 3 elvish rings, Narya, Nenya, Vilya, and the specific preserved beauty that the 3 sustained fades with the one's passing. Rivendell diminishes. Lothlorien loses the golden quality that Nenya gave it. The elves leave. The 4th age is, among other things, the age in which the magical quality of the world drains away, replaced by the ordinary and the mortal. In our timeline, the 3 were never used with the same sustained, decades-long deployment that the canonical story required. Nenya was active throughout. Galadriel maintained Lothrien's preservation across the 3 years of the ring's presence at Isengard and the months of the quest. Vilya was active in Rivendell. Narya was carried by Gandalf throughout his ranging and his support of the quest. But the specific anxiety that defines the canonical 3's situation, the knowledge that the one must survive for the 3 to retain their power, the terrible bind of needing the one to exist in order for the preservation to continue, this anxiety was present, but shorter in duration. In the canonical story, the elves maintained their realms under the shadow for thousands of years, knowing that each year of preservation was a year of complicity with the One Ring's continued existence. The guilt was long and the bind was deep. In our timeline, the bind lasted 3 years, not 3,000. The 3 sustained their realms for 3 years while Saruman held the ring. And then the ring was destroyed and the 3 failed as they always were going to fail, but the failure came after a shorter period of the compromised preservation. What this means is subtle but real. Rivendell diminishes, and Lothlorien loses its golden quality. But the grief of the loss is less entangled with the long guilt. The elves leave, they were always going to leave. The departure of the elves from Middle-earth is not contingent on this or any specific timeline's ring crisis. But they leave with a slightly different texture to the leaving. Less the long 6,000-year wait of the long defeat. More the specific. Our task here is done quality of beings who were waiting for an ending and have now seen one. Galadriel boards the ship at the Grey Havens with a specific quality of someone whose 3-year anxiety, the I have Nenya and Nenya depends on the one quality of compromise, has been resolved, not healed. Resolved, the resolution is not what she hoped, but it is resolution. She sails west. Celeborn stays for a time in the east, and then follows. The forest of Lothlorien becomes, season by season, an ordinary forest, and the elves who watch it change feel the change as the closing of a long chapter rather than the violent breaking of an ongoing story. This is the specific difference that matters. In the canonical story, the ring's destruction is a catastrophe that happens to the elves even as it saves the world. In our timeline, the ring's destruction is still a loss for the elves. The 3 still fail, the preservation still ends, the departure still comes. But it is a loss that arrives on the heels of 3 years rather than millennia. The wound is smaller. Not small, but smaller. The elvish age still ends. It just ends with slightly less accumulated grief. Part 41. The Aftermath and What It Cost. The ring is destroyed. Sauron is unmade. The shadow lifts. These are the same facts as the canonical story, and they have the same profound, world-changing quality. The Third Age ends. The dominion of Sauron is over. The long darkness that has pressed on the free peoples of Middle-earth for 3,000 years is finally, comprehensively, gone. But the cost in this timeline is different, and the difference matters. The canonical quest, Frodo's quest, the Fellowship, the specific path that Tolkien designed, had a cost. Boromir died at Amon Hen. Gandalf fell in Moria and returned as Gandalf the White. The armies of Gondor bled on the Pelennor fields. The Shire was scoured. Théoden died on the Pelennor, killed by the Witch King. Merry and Pippin were captured by Uruk-hai. The cost was specific, human scale, personally devastating. In our timeline, the cost looks different. The Isengard army, every Uruk-hai, every creature that Saruman bred in 3 years of ring-accelerated program, is gone. Destroyed in the rearguard action against the Nazgul, spent in the specific. Military I am buying time for someone else way that armies sometimes buy time. The industrial complex of Isengard, the forges, the mechanisms, the specific, terrible productive capacity that Saruman built, exists, standing empty now, its purpose dissolved, its creator sitting in a chair in Orthanc staring at the wall. Rohan is shaken but unbroken. Théoden, who was misled but not corrupted, who made a strategic error but corrected it, who chose to defend his borders against the Nazgul rather than facilitate their pursuit, Théoden survives. Rohan is intact. The alliance with Isengard is dissolved, but the kingdom that the canonical story burns is standing. Aragorn's claim to Gondor's throne still exists, and the events of the War of the Ring, compressed, changed in detail but not in trajectory, still produce the moment where the rightful king returns. Gondor still needs Aragorn, even though Gondor's crisis was different, and the armies were different, and the Pelennor fields looked different, because no Isengard force was part of the conflict. But the specific victory is different. The canonical story's victory was, among other things, a victory of smallness against magnitude. The utter improbability of a hobbit succeeding where elves and men and wizards had failed. The specific Tolkienian argument that the small and the humble and the overlooked are the world's real heroes. In our timeline, that argument is still made. But it is made differently. In our timeline, the hobbit only gets to the fire because a fallen wizard spent 3 years building an army he ultimately sacrificed to buy the time a hobbit needed to walk. The victory is still a hobbit's, but the road was paved, partially, with Saruman's regret. Part 42. Gandalf visits Orthanc. A month after the ring's destruction, Gandalf rides to Isengard. He finds it quiet. The forges are cold. The pits are empty. The machinery sits motionless in the valley that used to be a ring of trees, and the specific industrial quality of a place designed for production without purpose. The quality of a factory that has forgotten what it was making fills the Nan Karuna like a kind of silence. Saruman comes down from Orthanc to meet him. He looks reduced, not physically diminished, not visibly aged, but smaller in the way that beings are smaller when the specific external support structure that was propping them up at artificial height has been removed. 3 years of ring enhancement, then the ring's withdrawal, then the weeks since. The baseline Saruman. The Saruman underneath the ring's augmentation. He is old. Not old in the way mortals are old. Saruman is a Maya, and Maya do not age. But old in the way that beings who have been through something specific are old. The kind of old that comes from carrying a particular weight for a long time and then setting it down and feeling all the distance it traveled in your bones. Gandalf says, "The ring is gone." Saruman says, "I know." Gandalf says, "Frodo and Sam are safe. They've been brought out of Mordor. They're healing." Saruman says, "Good." He pauses. Then, what is the hobbit's name? The elder one. Gandalf says, "Frodo." Frodo Baggins. Saruman is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "I want to write him a letter, if that's permitted. If he would read it." Gandalf says, "I think he would." They stand together in the empty valley of Isengard, the wizard who carried a ring of fire and the wizard who carried a ring of power and lost it in the best possible way. Looking at the cold machinery and the bare stone where the trees used to be, and neither of them says what they are both thinking, that this is not how it was supposed to look. That the Valley of Isengard was one of the most beautiful places in the world once, before a wizard who valued skill over beauty turned it into a monument to what skill becomes when the beauty is stripped away. Gandalf says, "Come east with me. Help restore what you took." Saruman says, "I don't know if the trees will grow back in my lifetime." Gandalf says, "Then we'll plant them and see." Part 43. What Saruman's letter says. Frodo receives the letter at Bag End. Sits in the same kitchen where Gandalf explained the situation to him 3 years ago, or what feels like 30 years ago, in the specific way that great experiences age the people who go through them, and reads it by the fire. The letter is long and formal in the way that beings who were trained in the courts of the Valar write formal things, structured, precise, careful with its words, using language as the craftsman uses material. It begins, "I found the ring because I was looking for it, and I believed that finding it was the most important thing I had ever done. I was right about the importance, and wrong about everything else." It explains, in the specific detail that Saruman's craftsman's mind naturally provides, what the ring actually does. Not the dramatic seductions, not the obvious. You will have terrible power quality of corruption that makes for compelling mythology. The subtle version. The version that doesn't announce itself. The version that works by finding the exact shape of your existing desires and making them slightly larger each day, so gradually that the growth is invisible until you are trying to remember who you were before it started. It says, "I was the most informed person in Middle-earth about the ring's mechanisms. I had studied it longer and more carefully than anyone. I believed that this knowledge was protection. I was wrong. Understanding the trap does not make you immune to the trap. It gives you a more sophisticated understanding of why you can't escape it. It says, "You carried it for 2 months. I wore it for 3 years. You are a better hobbit than I was a wizard, and that is not an insult to me. It is the deepest possible truth about what this situation required." It says, "I hope Bag End is warm. I hope you eat well. I hope the ordinary things are easy to return to." It ends, "I am sorry for the 3 years I cost you. For the Isengard that blocked the road. For the Rohan that nearly turned against you. For the time the Nazgul had to hunt that they would not have had if I had been what I was supposed to be. The ring found me because I was looking for it, and everything that followed is the consequence of that looking. I would ask your forgiveness, but I don't think that is what you owe me. I think what I owe you is the truth. So that is what I have tried to give you." Frodo folds the letter, puts it in the drawer with the few other things he keeps. He does not write back immediately. He thinks about it for 3 days. Then he writes 5 words on a blank page, folds it, addresses it to Orthanc, and gives it to the post. The 5 words are, "Thank you for the road." Part 44. The deepest question. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the question we started with, and let me give you the answer that the alternate history produces. What if Saruman found the ring first? The answer is not. Saruman defeats Sauron. The answer is not. The world is saved by the smartest being in it. Those are the answers that the ring wants you to believe are possible, wants Saruman to believe are achievable, because the ring's primary tool is the specific seduction of the capable person who believes that capability is enough. The real answer is, the ring found Saruman because Saruman was looking for it, and everything after that is consequence. The ring did not go to Isengard by accident, did not roll through the mud into a position where Saruman's agents would find it through sheer, random good fortune. The ring is a made thing with Sauron's purpose impressed into every atom of its structure. And Sauron's purpose is, always and above everything, to return to Sauron's hand. The ring goes where it calculates it can best accomplish this. Saruman, who had spent decades advertising his specific vulnerabilities to the ring, advertising them in every White Council meeting where he praised skill over wisdom, in every private conversation where he expressed his conviction that knowing something was the same as being safe from it, Saruman was the perfect target. Not despite his intelligence. Because of it. This is the story's deepest implication, and it is one of the things that makes Tolkien's original so radical. The story is not saying that smart people fail. The story is saying that smart people fail in a specific way that dumb people are immune to. The ring cannot reach the hobbit who only wants second breakfast. The ring can absolutely reach the wizard who believes he understands the ring. Saruman's downfall is not his ambition, exactly. It is his confidence. His certainty that intellectual mastery of a problem is the same as mastery of the problem. His inability to apply his own knowledge to himself, to say, I know what the ring does. I know it amplifies desire. I know it corrupts. And I know that knowing this does not make me immune. Because I am a being with desires, and therefore I am a being the ring can use. He couldn't say this. The pride that kept him looking for the ring in the first place, the specific Saruman-shaped conviction that he was the one person capable of this, the pride was the ring's entry point, and the ring used it. Part 44b. What Sauron felt when the ring was destroyed. I want to give you Sauron's experience of the ring's destruction, because it is the piece of this story that rarely gets examined, and in our timeline it has a different quality than in the canonical story. In the canonical story, Sauron's destruction is the destruction of a being who had been rebuilding for 3,000 years. who had gathered his power, assembled his armies, brought his full terrible will to bear on the recovery of the ring. Sauron in the canonical War of the Ring is ascendant, is at, or near, the height of what he can achieve without the ring. The destruction of the ring, in that context, is the interruption of a campaign that was going well. In our timeline, Sauron has been reactive for 3 years, has been responding to Saruman rather than initiating, has been in the specific position of the player whose primary asset has been borrowed, watching the ring sit in Isengard, feeding information through it, waiting for the moment to retrieve it. Watching that moment slide away as Frodo took the ring and walked south, and Saruman's army bought the time. Sauron's destruction in our timeline is the destruction of a being who has been almost, who has been within reach of the ring multiple times over 3 years, and whose patient, expert, this is how I always win strategy, was defeated not by a great force arrayed against him, but by a 17-year-old hobbit's specific quality of not wanting it enough to resist it. This is, to whatever degree Sauron's awareness has something that resembles an emotional response, the worst possible way to lose. To have spent 3 years turning the ring's new bearer into a preparation tool for your own return. To have watched the ring enhanced Saruman build the West's military position into a tangle that favored no one. To have waited and planned and known that the ring was eventually coming back, and then to have the ring taken by a being so small and so unambitious that the ring literally could not find the hook. Sauron never encountered a hobbit, never modelled the hobbit as a ring-bearer possibility. In all the ring's long history, from Isildur through the 9 kings of men, through Gollum, through the ring lying in the mud, the ring had never been held by a being whose defining quality was the desire for a quiet life. The ring was not designed for this, had no strategy for this, and the ring's failure to leverage Frodo was the ring's, and therefore Sauron's, single exploitable structural weakness, never identified until the moment it became decisive. The shadow of Barad-dûrtha does not fall with the specific drama of a dramatic defeat. It dissipates. Unmakes, the specific quality of something enormous becoming nothing that the ring's destruction produces in Sauron, is less a cataclysm and more an erasure. The eye that sees everything closes, not because it is blinded, but because the eye and the seeing and the eye who sees were all expressions of a will that no longer has the substance to express itself. Middle-earth does not hear Sauron scream. Middle-earth simply notices, in the specific way that a room notices when a cold draft has stopped, that the shadow is gone. Part 45. The version that could have been. There is a version of this alternate history where it goes differently, where Saruman, the moment his agents report the gold ring found in the river mud, makes a different first decision. In this version, Saruman's agents bring the ring to Isengard, and Saruman looks at it and recognizes it, and then does something that nothing in his character predicts, but that is theoretically possible for any being at any moment. He chooses humility over intelligence. He calls a White Council meeting immediately, does not study the ring, does not touch the ring more than necessary to confirm its identity, does not indulge even briefly in the specific craftsman's curiosity that says, "Let me see how this was made." He calls the council, tells them exactly what he has found, and says, "I cannot be the person who handles this. My specific weaknesses make me exactly wrong for this task." Who is the right person? In this version, the council immediately focuses on the question of a carrier. Someone small, someone without grand ambitions, someone the ring cannot reach. In this version, Gandalf goes to the Shire not as a last resort, but as a first step, and Frodo enters the story 20 years earlier, and with the full backing of the White Council behind him. In this version, there are no 3 years of Isengard rearming, no alliance with Rohan under false pretenses, no Uruk-hai army built and spent, no Nazgul alerted by the ring's signal from a major power, no race across the southern reaches, no last stand in the approaches to Mordor. In this version, the ring is destroyed years earlier, at less cost, with less damage to the free peoples, with Saruman still intact as the head of the White Council and the most respected strategic mind in Middle-earth. Saruman could not be this person. The specific architectural quality of his character, built by all, shaped by ages of study, honed by centuries of pride in his own capability, this architecture did not include the specific component that would have been required. The ability to look at the most fascinating object in the world and say, "Not for me." This is not a moral failing in the simple sense. It is a structural limitation. Saruman was made to be brilliant, and he was brilliant, and the brilliance was the problem. The ring was patient enough to wait for exactly this weakness in exactly this being. Part 46. What Middle-earth learns. The world that emerges from the alternate histories version of the War of the Ring is different from Tolkien's canon in several specific ways, and the differences are instructive. The knowledge that Saruman's ring-wearing produced, the journal, the letters, the specific, detailed, technical account of what it feels like to be corrupted by a ring of power from the inside, this knowledge exists in a form it never existed in the canonical story. The canonical story gives us the destruction of the ring and the end of Sauron and the beginning of the Fourth Age. It does not give us a first-hand account from a ring-bearer who survived long enough to understand what had happened to him and was capable of writing it down. Saruman's journal, distributed by Galadriel to the great libraries of the West, to Rivendell, to Minas Tirith, to wherever wisdom is kept and studied, becomes something that it was specifically not designed to be. A warning. Not a warning about the ring, which no longer exists. A warning about the class of thing the ring represents. About the specific mechanism by which objects designed to amplify desire corrupt the beings who wield them. About the particular vulnerability of the capable and the confident and the convinced of their own understanding. Elrond reads the journal, reads it slowly, over several days, with the specific 3,000-year perspective quality of attention that Elrond brings to everything. When he is finished, he sets it down and sits for a long time. Then he says to Celeborn, he was the most qualified person in the world to resist the ring, and he was the most qualified person in the world to be destroyed by it. These are the same fact. Celeborn, who is Galadriel's daughter, and who has her mother's specific quality of sitting with difficult truths rather than immediately resolving them, says yes. And Elrond says, I wonder how many of the things I have been most confident about are shaped the same way. This is the Fourth Age wisdom. The wisdom that comes not from the ring's destruction, but from the specific, humbling Saruman-shaped reminder that intelligence and knowledge and mastery are not the same thing as safety. That the most dangerous corruptions are the ones that work with your strengths rather than against your weaknesses. Faramir reads the journal in Minas Tirith, reads it with the specific, studious quality that makes Faramir the most bookish of warriors and the most martial of scholars. When he finishes, he does not say anything to anyone for a day. Then he writes a response, not to Saruman, who has not asked for a response, but to himself in the private journal he keeps. He writes, the wizard who knew the most about the ring was the wizard most thoroughly defeated by it. The hobbit who knew almost nothing about the ring carried it further than anyone. There is a lesson here about the kinds of knowledge that are useful for the kinds of tasks that matter most, and I intend to spend the rest of my life thinking about it. Merry, who receives a copy of Saruman's journal through Gandalf's distribution, and who reads it with the specific quality of a hobbit who has been in the story and therefore reads descriptions of the story's events with the particular interest of the participant. Merry reads the journal and says to Pippin, "He knew the whole time." He wrote down that he knew the whole time, and he kept the ring anyway. Pippin says yes. Merry says, "That's the most frightening thing in the whole story." Pippin, who is smarter than he appears, and who has been in dangerous situations with rings and palantry, and the specific quality of Middle-earth's malevolent artifacts to draw out exactly the worst implications of every situation. Pippin says, not that he kept it. That he knew. They sit with that for a while. Outside the window, the Shire is exactly what it looks like. Green and ordinary and entirely unaware. And the two hobbits sit in the specific quality of we have been somewhere important and come back that they share with Frodo and Sam. And they understand, perhaps better than anyone who has not been in the story, what Saruman's journal is really saying. That the ring did not need to hide what it was. The ring showed itself to Saruman with full clarity, and the showing was the trap. Because knowing you are in a trap and choosing to stay in it because you believe you are exceptional, that is not intelligence defeating corruption. That is intelligence being the corruption. Part 47. The Shire returns to normal. Frodo comes back to Bag End. In this timeline, he comes back differently than the canonical Frodo, no scouring of the Shire, because Saruman never went to the Shire, never needed the petty revenge of the canonical ending. The Shire is exactly as he left it, comfortable and insular, and entirely unaware of how close it came to being unmade, along with everything else. He is changed. The ring changes everyone it touches, even briefly, even when they resist it. Not corrupted. Frodo is not corrupted. But marked. Carrying something that doesn't have a name, but that he can feel in certain lights, at certain times, the specific quality of I have held the thing itself, and put it down again that never entirely leaves the person who does it. Sam moves into the next door hole and plants Galadriel's gift, the single melon seed from the file, in the party field. The tree grows with the specific quality of elvish-influenced growth. A little faster than it should, a little taller. The leaves a little more golden in autumn than they have any botanical right to be. It is, in its small Shire way, beautiful. Merry and Pippin come back with the specific quality of having been somewhere important and done something they will never entirely be able to explain, but carrying the experience as a permanent brightness rather than a permanent wound. They are better than they were. Not grander. Not elevated in the way that dramatic experience elevates in stories. Better in the specific, quiet way of people who found out what they were made of and were pleasantly surprised. Bilbo, who has been in Rivendell for this entire adventure because Gandalf judged correctly that Bilbo's age and the ring's 3-year presence as a signal in the world made the Shire too dangerous for him. Bilbo comes home to Bag End and immediately asks Frodo what he missed, and whether there is any of the good pipeweed left, and what all this business about a wizard being in a tower was about. Frodo makes tea and tells him everything. It takes 4 hours and 2 pots, and Bilbo's expression, cycling through astonishment and indignation and pride and worry and back to astonishment, is one of the specific joys of the Fourth Age. At the end of it, Bilbo is quiet for a while. Then he says, "So you carried the ring?" Frodo says, "Yes." Bilbo says, "What was it like?" And Frodo, who has been thinking about how to answer this question for weeks, who has been trying to find the words for it in the specific quiet hours of the journey home, Frodo says, "Like carrying a very cold stone that was always slightly heavier than the last time you picked it up." Bilbo is quiet again. "Then I'm glad it was you." Frodo says, "So am I." Then, after a pause, I think. Bilbo laughs, the specific quality of a very old hobbit's laugh, which is the laugh of someone who has been in enough situations to know that I think is frequently the most honest answer available. Sam comes in through the back door to ask about dinner, finds them both at the table with empty cups, and the specific expression of people who have just finished saying something important, and says, "Right, I'll do the potatoes then." And the evening proceeds in the exact, ordinary, everything is fine quality of evenings in the Shire that the Ring spent 3 years threatening, and that have now, once again, become themselves. Part 48. Saruman at the end. Saruman plants trees in the Nan Karuna. This is the detail that the alternate history comes down to, and it is simultaneously the most mundane and the most resonant image in the whole story. The wizard who cut down every tree in the valley, who turned a place of ancient beauty into an industrial complex, who built an army and built walls and built the machinery of dominion, this wizard, afterwards, plants trees. Not because it will fix everything, not because the trees will grow back in his lifetime, or in any lifetime he can reliably predict. Not because anyone has forgiven him, though some have, Frodo's 5 words, Gandalf's offer to plant alongside him. Not because it undoes anything, but because it is the thing that most directly contradicts what he did. Because a being who loved craft above all things, and who allowed that love to be corrupted into production for its own sake needs to find, on the other side of the corruption, what craft was for. And what craft was for, what old specific form of love for the world always pointed toward, was not dominion, was not production, was making things that grew. Gandalf visits every year. They plant together in the spring. Discuss whether to use saplings or seeds. Argue about the proper depth for root placement with the specific quality of two beings who have known each other for 2,000 years and still, on the question of arboreal horticulture, disagree. There is a very old Entish name for the Nan Karuna that predates Saruman's arrival by several thousand years. The name means simply the Valley of the Trees. The name that the valley had before Saruman came, and that the valley lost when Saruman remade it. In the late Fourth Age, many years after the events of this alternate history, many years after Saruman and Gandalf both sailed west on the ships that carry the Maiar home, the valley of Isengard is visited by travellers who come not to see the Tower of Orthanc, which stands as empty and enduring as ever, but to see the forest that has grown up around it. The trees are old. Old in the way that trees planted with patience become old, dense and tall and specific in the way of forests that have been tended by someone who understood what trees require. The travellers who do not know the history, who have not read Saruman's journal, who know only that this valley used to be treeless and industrial and is now something different. The travellers walk through the forest and feel what visitors to old forests always feel, that someone was here before you, that someone loved this place, that the trees remember something that the travellers cannot name. They cannot name it. They do not know they are standing in the answer to the question, what does a wizard do after he is wrong about everything? He plants trees. He tends them. He does the slow, patient, nobody notices until it's beautiful work of making something that will outlast the making. Part 49. The heart of it. Let me tell you what this story is actually about. It is not about whether Saruman could have beaten Sauron. Whether a ring-empowered wizard is a match for the Dark Lord is an interesting question, but it is not the interesting question. The ring is not a power equalizer. The ring is a trap. And the trap does not care whether the person in it is powerful or weak, intelligent or naive. The trap catches on the specific thing that makes you you, finds the quality that defines you, and twists it until it turns against you. For Saruman, the defining quality was mastery. The love of knowing things, the specific all-trained conviction that understanding an object was the beginning of controlling it. For Isildur, the defining quality was pride, the king's specific pride that says, "I have earned this, and I will keep it." For Gollum, the defining quality was isolation, the need for the one thing that was his and no one else's. For Boromir, it was duty, the fierce, misplaced duty of a man who loved his people so completely that the ring could sell him the ring as an act of sacrifice. Every bearer is caught by a different hook. The ring has an infinite number of hooks. The ring is patient enough to find the right one for every being it encounters. The only beings who are genuinely ring-proof are the beings who don't have the specific kind of desire the ring uses. Not the beings who have overcome desire. Overcoming desire is still desire-shaped, still something the ring can reach. But the beings who simply do not have the hook the ring requires. The hobbits. The creatures of the world who want small things, specific things, the next meal and the warm hearth and the friend beside them on the road. Frodo is not a hero in the conventional sense. Frodo is not particularly brave, not particularly strong, not particularly anything that heroic tradition values. Frodo is specifically, usefully, exactly, ordinarily small. And the ring, for all its patience and all its intelligence and all its 3,000-year history of breaking greater beings than Frodo Baggins, the ring cannot find the hook in ordinary, cannot leverage the desire to go home, cannot amplify the wish for second breakfast into dominion over Middle-earth. This is what Tolkien built. This is the specific, counterintuitive, deeply true argument at the center of the Lord of the Rings. The qualities that make you powerful are the qualities that make you vulnerable. The qualities that make you small are the qualities that save the world. Saruman found the ring. The ring found Saruman. And everything that followed, the 3 years and the deception and the army and the sacrifice and the planting of the trees, everything that followed was the consequence of the specific, terrible, entirely human truth that knowing better has never once in the history of any world been the same as doing better. And there is one more thing, one final implication that the story produces, and that this alternate version makes more visible than the canonical telling does. In the canonical story, the ring goes from Sméagol to Bilbo to Frodo, without ever encountering a bearer who understood what it was. The ring's victory conditions are never fully named by anyone holding it. In our story, the ring met someone who named the conditions perfectly, in writing before the end, who documented the mechanism with the precision of a craftsman who had spent a lifetime learning to describe things exactly, who left the document behind. This means that the Fourth Age in our timeline has something the canonical Fourth Age does not. The specific, Saruman written, "I was in the trap, and I know what the trap feels like" testimony that turns the ring from a mythological threat into a case study. A thing that happened to a specific being in a specific way that can now be read and understood and not defeated. The ring no longer exists to be defeated, but recognized. Recognized in its descendants. In every version of the specific class of thing the ring represents, the object or idea or ambition that promises to amplify your greatest strength and delivers instead the amplification of your greatest weakness. Saruman's journal is the mythology's gift to the Fourth Age, the gift that the mythology's villain, alone among villains, earned by being honest about his failure. The gift of the warning that comes from inside the experience rather than from outside it. The ring is gone. The warning remains. The trees grow in the valley that was once a ruin. And the next person who picks up the next version of the next most dangerous thing in their world has, if they look, a very detailed account of what to expect. Part 50. The final word. We began with a question. What if Saruman found the ring first? And here, at the end of a story that is darker and more complicated and more true to the mythology's actual spirit than a simple villain wins or simple hero triumphs story could be, here is the answer. The ring would have been found by someone looking for it. Would have been found by exactly the wrong person finding it for exactly the wrong reasons. Would have done what it always does. Would have taken 3 years to turn the most qualified person in the world into the most effectively compromised person in the world. Would have cost everything the West had built, in people and alliances and trust and forest, before the only possible answer, a hobbit with a desire to go home, could be arranged. The ring would still have been destroyed. Not because of Saruman's intelligence or his mastery or his ring theory expertise. In spite of all of that. By a 17-year-old who thought Elvish grammar was interesting, and who, when given the worst object in the world to carry, carried it to where it needed to go and put it down. Tolkien's argument in the canonical story and in every alternate telling is the same. The future belongs to the ones who don't want to rule it. The world is saved not by the great and the powerful who understand the danger and believe they can master it, but by the small and the overlooked who understand only that the thing in their pocket is not theirs and needs to be returned. Saruman's gift to this story, in the end, after everything, after the 3 years and the ring and the trees, is the gift of the cautionary tale told honestly. The gift of someone who had every advantage and every qualification and every intellectual tool available, who looked at the worst thing in the world and said, I can handle this, and couldn't, and knew it, and said so, and planted trees. That is the mercy in this story. The specific quality of not entirely hopeless that Tolkien always builds into even the darkest corners of his mythology. That the being who was most wrong can, having been wrong, become most useful. That the craftsman who built the wrong things can, having torn them down, build something worth keeping. The road goes ever on. The trees keep growing in the valley of Isengard. And somewhere in the Shire, a hobbit who went very far and came back is in a warm kitchen talking to his uncle. And the fire is bright, and the tea is good, and the ring is gone. That's the story. Stay with us. The road goes ever on and on.